Hello everyone, before the start of the video I would like to request you all to like, subscribe, that's it, thank you and enjoy. Responsibility. Mike. When I got home that evening, Leah was just coming in too, tugging her jacket off as she shut the door behind her. Perfect timing. I crossed the room without thinking and leaned in to kiss her. She stopped me with one hand to my chest and made a face like I'd just tried to hug her while covered in roadkill. Ew, she said flatly. You stink of leech. I froze, blinked, then sniffed my shirt. Yeah, okay, fair, right, I said, scratching the back of my neck. I kinda forgot about that. You get used to it after a while. It doesn't bother me as much anymore. She stared at me like I'd just confessed to enjoying the smell of rotting fish. You can get used to that smell? She asked incredulously. No, absolutely not. Go take a shower, now, and scrub yourself raw if you have to. I straightened instantly, snapping her a dramatic military salute. As you order, I said solemnly. She shook her head, muttering something about vampires as I headed for the bathroom. When I came out of the shower, towel slung over my shoulder and hair still damp, the smell of food hit me like a physical blow. Not just food, dinner. Voices followed right after, familiar ones. I stepped into the dining room and stopped short. My parents were already home. Worse, they were already eating. Leah sat at the table with them, relaxed, one leg tucked under her chair, chatting with my mom like she'd been there all evening. Plates were half-full, glasses already touched. I stared at them, wounded. You couldn't wait? I asked, putting a hand over my heart dramatically. I was in there fighting for my life. Scrubbing vampire stink off my soul. My dad chuckled around a mouthful of food, but my mom didn't even look apologetic. She glanced at me with a brow raised, fork paused midair. Well, she asked, are you eating or not? Because if not, I can just take your plate and... I was already moving. I slid into the chair next to Leah so fast it scraped loudly against the floor, grabbed my plate like it might disappear, and immediately started shoveling food into my mouth. Thank you, I said through a mouthful, nodding enthusiastically. This is a maze. Michael Newton, my mom snapped. Swallow before you speak. I obeyed instantly, chewing harder and faster like my life depended on it. My dad laughed openly now, shaking his head. You'd think we never fed him. Leah smirked beside me, elbow resting on the table, clearly entertained as she watched me demolish what could only be described as a small mountain of food. And honestly, she wasn't much better. Between the two of us, plates emptied at an alarming rate. My dad's amusement slowly turned into a wince as he watched us go. So, he said cautiously, setting his fork down, Mike. You think you could go fishing again soon? I paused mid-bite and looked up. Money's getting a bit tight, he added, not meeting my eyes. Groceries, utilities, you know. I swallowed properly this time and leaned back slightly in my chair, a small smile tugging at my mouth. Yeah, I said, about that, money's not going to be an issue anymore. 3 sets of eyes locked onto me. Leah narrowed hers immediately. You didn't hit your head, did you? No, I didn't, I'm telling the truth. My mom frowned slightly. My dad blinked. Leah just stared at me like she was waiting for the punchline. I sighed and set my fork down. Alice is going to help me invest. That did not help. My dad tilted his head. Invest? How? Leah crossed her arms. Mike. Okay, I said quickly. Before you all think I've lost it, Alice can see the future. To her, investing is basically stealing candy from a baby. My dad's expression shifted. Hope crept in slowly, like he didn't dare trust it yet. So, he asked quietly, no more debts? I nodded. No more counting cents at the end of the month? His voice cracked just a little. I nodded again. We can finally eat something other than rice and fish. That one hit harder than I expected. Yeah, I said softly. Yeah, Dad, we can. He sat there for a second, staring at nothing, eyes suspiciously shiny. Then he turned to my mom suddenly, energy snapping back into him. Honey, he said, standing up, go pack your things. We're going to Hawaii. My mom gasped. Hawaii, she repeated, already half out of her chair. Yes, he said firmly. Immediately, she didn't argue. She beamed, leaned over to kiss his cheek, squeezed my shoulder, and disappeared down the hall already talking about swimsuits. Leah and I exchanged a look. Dad, I said slowly, what about the store? He turned back to me, serious now. Mike, he said, pointing at me, it's time you start learning responsibility. Ooh-ho, you'll be taking the reins while your mother and I are away. My stomach dropped. Wait, I've got to pack now, he added cheerfully, already heading after my mom. And then he was gone. I sat there, dumbfounded, fork hanging uselessly in my hand. Leah stared at me for exactly 3 seconds. Then she burst out laughing. Full in laughter, head thrown back, shoulders shaking, absolutely zero sympathy. I turned to her slowly, wounded beyond words. You could at least pretend to feel bad, I said. She wiped at her eyes. You reap what you sow. She nudged my knee with hers. And admit it, they deserve a break. Yeah, I muttered. They do. She tilted her head, studying me. So, store manager, do you even know what you need to do? I groaned and leaned back in my chair. Unfortunately, yes, I've worked there enough times when I wanted extra pocket money. She grinned. Good, because that would have been tragic. I sighed, then straightened a bit. I could ask my friends if they want summer jobs. Split the shifts, keep things running. Leah smirked. Look at you, responsible already. I glanced at the now empty plates on the table, the warm, lived-in mess of the dining room, the echo of my parents' laughter still lingering in the house. Yeah, life was getting complicated, but for once, it felt like the good kind. Short chapter, kinda tired and couldn't come up with more ideas. I'm probably going to do a time skip soon. Support with power stones or comments. Turtle musical notes. 27 comments, 0 vote. Time passes. Monday, September 5, 2005. Mike. A little over a month had passed. Not that you'd be able to tell from my life, honestly. When you have responsibilities, real ones, time tends to blur together. And by responsibilities, I mean owning a store, and then hiring someone competent to actually manage it while I sit back and enjoy the benefits of being a hands-off owner. Best decision I ever made. The store was running smoothly, profits steady, 0 headaches. Which left me with a brand new problem. I suddenly had way too much money and absolutely no idea what to do with it. That part was entirely Alice Cullen's fault. I still remembered the look on her face when I'd asked, very carefully, how long it usually took to see returns on investments. She'd blinked at me, once. Oh, she said lightly, like we were discussing the weather, about a week. I'd laughed, actually laughed. Alice, I said, leaning back in the chair across from her, I'm not expecting miracles. Just don't let my money disappear, okay? She smiled at me then. That sharp, knowing smile that always made me feel like I was several steps behind. A week, she repeated. 7 days later, my phone buzzed while I was halfway through reorganizing the store's backroom. Bank notification. Deposit received. I stared at the screen. What the hell? Just over $100,000 sat there, nice and clean, like it had always belonged to me. I called her immediately. You moved the decimal point wrong, I said the second she picked up. Nope, this is too much. That's 5%, she replied calmly. Just something to tide you over, the rest will be reinvested. Tide me over, I repeated weakly. Alice, this is more money than I've ever had in my life. And you'll have more, she added. The next transfer will be in a month. She hung up before I could argue. A month later, actually, a few days ago, the second transfer came in. Millions. Plural. That was the exact moment it truly sank in. I was officially a millionaire. The first thing I did was transfer $1 million to my parents. They'd just gotten back from Hawaii, skin sun-kissed, smiles wide, still riding that vacation high when I told them to check their bank account. My mom frowned at her phone. Michael, did you mean to send us something? Yes, I said. She gasped. Actually gasped. Her hand flew to her chest and she swayed. Oh my God. Dad leaned over to look. Then he dropped straight back onto the couch out cold. Dad, I shouted, rushing forward. He came to a few seconds later, blinking up at the ceiling. Am I dead? He asked hoarsely. No, I said dryly. But apparently money can kill you. Mom was crying, laughing, praying, all at once. It took me a good 10 minutes to convince them I wasn't involved in anything illegal. I'd thought about buying a new car briefly. Then I looked at my current one, big, solid, barely a year old, and realized I'd just be wasting money for the sake of it. What am I supposed to do? I muttered to myself one night, collect cars like Pokemon. Nah, my trusty Mountaineer still worked fine. No reason to fix what wasn't broken. The beach trips, though, those were worth it. La Push was freezing as always, even in summer, but that hadn't stopped us. Me, the guys, and Leah, who'd insisted cliff jumping was no big deal. It's just water, she said, standing at the edge, arms crossed. Water that feels like ice knives, I replied. She smirked. You scared? No, I said, just sane. She jumped anyway. I followed. And yeah, if you have a superhuman body that doesn't register cold properly, cliff jumping is actually pretty damn fun. Leah surfaced beside me, laughing, hair slicked back, eyes bright. See, she said, worth it. I had to admit, it was. But poor Tyler, who was the only other one who dared to jump, was freezing his ass, looking at us like we were crazy as we climbed to jump a second time. Flashback, July 27, 2005. I hadn't planned anything for my birthday. Honestly, it kind of snuck up on me. One day it was just another Tuesday, the next Sue Clearwater was insisting that I come over for dinner because turning 18 only happens once. And with my parents still in Hawaii, she saw it as her duty to make sure I celebrated properly. So that's how I ended up at the Clearwater house that Wednesday evening, the place already alive when I arrived. The windows glowed warm against the early summer dusk, and the smell of food hit me the moment Sue opened the door. There he is, she said brightly, pulling me into a hug before I could even say hello. The birthday boy. I told you it wasn't a big deal, I protested, smiling anyway. Too late, Leah called from the living room. Cake's already involved. That explained everything. Harry was sitting in his chair, relaxed, watching the room with that quiet, content look he always had. Seth was sprawled on the floor nearby, fiddling with something I couldn't see, and Leah leaned against the wall with her arms crossed, pretending she wasn't excited while absolutely being excited. Dinner passed easily, laughing, teasing, stories I'd already heard but didn't mind hearing again. At some point Sue disappeared into the kitchen and came back carrying a cake. Chocolate with thick frosting, and uneven lettering which was probably Seth's work. Happy 18th, Mike. Seth's eyes lit up. Can we sing now? He asked. You don't ask that, Leah said. You just do it. And then they did. Off-key, loud, and completely uncoordinated. I stood there, hands awkwardly at my sides, trying not to laugh while Sue beamed at me. Harry sang slowly but proudly, and Seth put his entire soul into it like this was the most important performance of his life. When it was over, I blew out the candles in one breath. Make a wish, Sue said. I didn't tell them I already had more than I knew what to do with. The gifts came next, nothing extravagant. A hoodie from Sue, warm and soft, that smelled faintly like laundry detergent and home. A badly wrapped box from Seth containing a new game he'd clearly debated buying for himself instead. Leah handed me a small package last. Don't get weird about it, she said quickly. Inside was a simple leather bracelet, sturdy, understated. It's cool, I said honestly. Thanks, she nodded once, satisfied. Then Harry cleared his throat. All right, he said, reaching beside his chair. 18's a big one. He pulled out a beer. Cold, glass bottle, beads of condensation catching the light. Sue raised an eyebrow but didn't say anything. Harry handed it to me like it was a rite of passage. My first beer, I said, taking it carefully. He grinned. Proud moment. I hesitated. Harry, I'm only 18. Not 21. He waved a hand dismissively. Don't mind the details. You're an adult now. Leah snorted. That's not how laws work. Relax, Harry said. One beer won't kill him. I shrugged, popped the cap with my thumb, and took a big sip. I immediately regretted it. My face twisted before I could stop it. What? I coughed, swallowing. Is it supposed to taste like piss? There was a beat of silence. Then Harry burst out laughing, deep and genuine. You get used to it, he said between chuckles. I stared at the bottle like it had personally betrayed me. I don't want to get used to it. Seth, who had been inching closer with hopeful eyes, froze. It tastes like that, he asked. I held the bottle out toward him slightly and he recoiled like I'd offered him poison. Nope, I'm good. Leah laughed. Sue shook her head with a smile, and Harry just leaned back, still amused. Fair enough, he said. More for me. We finished the cake after that, thick slices, too much frosting, Seth getting it on his nose, Leah stealing the corner piece because it has the best ratio. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't loud, but sitting there, surrounded by them, I realized something. This was what 18 should feel like. Not the money. Not the future. Not the expectations. Just warmth, laughter, and a birthday cake that leaned slightly to the left. Back to the present. Now, though, all of that was behind me. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel as the school came into view, sunlight glinting off familiar windows. First day of my last year. Same building, same people. Different me. Money, power, plans, none of it changed the fact that I was still driving to school on a Monday morning. I exhaled slowly. All right, I muttered, let's get this over with. And with that, I pulled into the parking lot. 23 comments 0 vote. Painfully normal. The parking lot of Forks High was damp, as usual. Low clouds hung over the trees like they were thinking about raining but hadn't quite committed yet. I drummed my fingers against the steering wheel as I pulled into my usual spot. My last year here. That thought hit a little harder than I expected. I stepped out of the car, and immediately got hit by the sound of lockers slamming, voices overlapping, and the unmistakable scent of teenage despair mixed with cafeteria food. Yep, school, the morning passed in a blur. English first, Mrs. Cope launching straight into syllabus talk like she hadn't seen us all age a year overnight. I sat back, pretending to listen while I kept looking out the window from time to time, wishing to be out there in the woods instead of cooped inside a classroom. History was next. I already knew most of it, which made it painfully slow. Still, I took notes. Responsibility, adult, store owner, millionaire. Okay, that last one still felt fake. By the time the lunch bell rang, I was starving. The cafeteria noise hit me like a wall the second I stepped in, plastic trays clattering, chairs scraping, voices bouncing off every surface like they were competing for dominance. I spotted our usual table immediately. Tyler was there first, leaning back in his chair with his usual smug posture. Ben sat beside him, methodically eating like a normal, well-adjusted human being. Eric was midrant, waving a fork around dangerously close to Tyler's face. And on the other side of the table, Lauren was leaning in, whispering something with a smirk. Jessica was nodding far too enthusiastically, eyes flicking around the room like she was afraid the gossip might escape if she didn't keep an eye on it. Angela sat with them, quieter, but clearly listening, hands folded around her drink. I dropped my tray down with a soft thud. "Miss me?" I asked. Jessica jumped slightly. "Oh, Mike, hi." Lauren smirked. "Look who finally decided to show up." Eric pointed at me accusingly. "Dude, you vanished." "I did not vanish," I said, sitting down. "I was around." Tyler snorted. "Around where? We barely saw you all summer." "Hey," I protested. "We went to the beach together." Tyler held up 2 fingers. "Only twice. Still counts." Jessica tilted her head. "You really were busy, though. Leah kept saying you were working nonstop." "That's because I was," I said. "You know, store, responsibilities, crushing capitalism." Lauren rolled her eyes. "You make it sound so tragic." I stabbed my fork into a fry. "Maybe you'd have seen me more if you agreed to help me at the store." Eric looked away immediately. Tyler suddenly found his tray fascinating. I glanced at Ben. Only Ben showed up. "Thanks for that, by the way. I would have been completely lost alone." Ben shrugged, smiling modestly. "It wasn't a big deal, and you paid me for it." "Still," I said sincerely. "Saved my life." Angela smiled warmly. "That was really nice of you, Ben." Lauren scoffed lightly. "I would have helped if I wasn't, busy." "With what?" Tyler asked. She opened her mouth, paused, then shrugged. "Stuff." Jessica leaned in again, lowering her voice like she was about to drop state secrets. "Speaking of being busy, have you seen the Cullens?" I resisted the urge to sigh. "They're right there," I said, nodding slightly. Across the cafeteria, Bella sat beside Edward, her tray mostly untouched. Edward sat perfectly still, eyes scanning the room with that uncanny awareness. "Bella looks different," Jessica whispered. "Happier," Angela added softly. Lauren frowned. "Weird. That's one word for it," Eric muttered. Right on cue, a massive shadow fell over our table. "Mind if I borrow a chair?" Emmett Cullen dropped into the empty seat beside me, tray stacked high with food he absolutely would not eat. Tyler blinked. Relax," Emmett said easily. "I know him." "That's debatable," I muttered. He grinned. "Still sore? Still undefeated?" Emmett laughed, loud and booming, drawing more than a few looks. "Man, you should have seen him this summer." I kicked his shin under the table. "Ow," he said, completely unfazed. "Anyway, just stopping by. Family table calls." He stood, gave me a quick nod, and wandered back toward the Cullens. That's when Edward looked over. Our eyes met, he gave a polite nod. I returned it, then, purely because I could, started singing in my head. Na-na-na-na-na-na, Batman. Edward's expression twitched. Just barely. His eyes snapped back to me, brows knitting together in confusion and mild offense. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing. He looked away stiffly, jaw tight. Alice caught my eye and waved enthusiastically. I waved back with a small smile and returned to my food. Lauren frowned. What was that about? Nothing, I said innocently, taking a bite of my food. Just saying hi. Jessica narrowed her eyes. You're weird, Mike. I swallowed and grinned. You're just noticing. The bell rang soon after, chairs scraping as everyone stood. As we gathered our trays, I caught Bella glancing over once more, curious, thoughtful. I looked away first, by the time PE rolled around, I was more than ready. Basketball as always. Coach put us into teams quickly. Tyler cracked his knuckles. All right, gentlemen, let's do this. Eric bounced the ball once, lost control of it immediately, and chased it across the court. Off to a strong start, I said with a chuckle. Ben took position calmly, stretching a bit. Just pass the ball. The game started, and immediately I had to remind myself to keep it at a normal human level. No super jumps, no blurs of motion, no impossible rebounds. Still, the ball came toward me, and my body reacted before my brain could slow it down. I adjusted at the last second, catching it cleanly, pivoting, and passing it to Ben with perfect timing. Nice, Ben said. Tyler drove forward, skilled and aggressive, drawing defenders. I watched the court, reading movements, anticipating reactions. Eric tripped over his own feet. Again, some things never changed. When the ball came back to me, I took the shot. Swish. A few plays later, another steal. Another pass, another basket. I wasn't moving fast or abusing my strength. But I was always where I needed to be. Tyler laughed as we jogged back. Man, where'd you learn to play like that? I shrugged. Good instincts. By the end, our team won by a comfortable margin. Eric sprawled on the floor like he'd just survived a war, Tyler grinning, Ben nodding in satisfaction. I didn't even break a sweat. As the bell rang and we headed for the lockers, I felt it settle in. Same school, same people, everything felt so painfully normal, but I was wondering how long that would last. Merry Christmas. 17 comments 0 vote. Someone has to worry. The drive from Forks High to La Push was the kind of familiar that settled into my bones. Gray sky, wet road, trees blurring past like they'd done 1,000 times before. The ocean smell started creeping in before I even saw the water, salt and cold and something ancient underneath it all. Every time I came out here, my shoulders loosened without me meaning them to. Today, Leah and I were staying at her parents' place. At this point, it barely registered as her parents' house. It felt shared, lived in, mine, in the way places become yours when you're welcome without question. I parked out front and didn't bother knocking. The door creaked open under my hand, the familiar warmth rolling out to meet me, wood, old furniture, coffee that had probably been reheated at least twice. I'm home, I called out casually, towing the door shut behind me. No answer. Instead, I was greeted by the unmistakable sound of chaos. Explosions, crude singing, something that sounded suspiciously like an opera about bodily functions. I followed the noise into the living room and immediately snorted. Seth was sprawled across the couch like gravity had personally offended him. One leg hung over the armrest, the other bent awkwardly under him. A controller was clutched in both hands, thumbs flying with intense concentration. On the TV, Conker's Bad Fur Day was in full swing. A giant, singing pile of poop with corn for teeth filled the screen. Toilet paper arced majestically through the air. Wow, I muttered, truly peak gaming. Without looking away, I greeted him. Hey, Coda. Seth's eyes flicked up for half a second, just long enough to acknowledge my existence. Hey, Kenai. Then he was right back to it, mashing buttons with renewed determination. Die, you disgusting abomination, he muttered at the TV, hurling another roll of toilet paper with expert precision. I dropped my school bag by the wall, the familiar thud echoing softly, and sank into the opposite couch. The cushions dipped just right, worn in from years of movie nights, naps, and family arguments that never quite turned ugly. I leaned back, arms crossing as I watched Seth play. The kid had focus when he wanted to. Tongue slightly poking out of the corner of his mouth, brows furrowed, shoulders tense like he was fighting for his life instead of a full-mouthed cartoon squirrel. "Where's Sue?" I asked after a moment. "Grocery shopping," Seth replied automatically, eyes never leaving the screen. Another explosion. Another musical number. I winced. "She brave enough to go alone?" "She took the car," he said. "So yeah, probably. Fair." I tilted my head, listening for footsteps, the familiar sound of boots being kicked off, the sharp commentary that usually announced Leah's arrival. But I got nothing. "Leah isn't back yet?" I asked. Seth smirked, still locked in battle. "Nope, the gorilla's still at work." I snorted despite myself. "You're gonna get murdered one of these days." He shrugged, finally glancing over at me. "Worth it." On-screen, Conker pulled a handle and the giant poop let out a dramatic final note lamenting its demise as it got flushed away. "Yes." Seth punched the air triumphantly, then slumped back into the couch, breathing hard like he'd just won a championship. I laughed quietly, shaking my head. Outside, the rain finally decided to commit, tapping against the windows in a steady rhythm. Inside, the house hummed with that quiet, lived-in comfort, TV static fading, the smell of old wood and sea air, and the sense that, for now at least, everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. Leah would be back soon. And knowing her, she'd have something to say the second she walked through that door. I barely waited for the victory music to finish before leaning forward, reaching for the second controller off the coffee table, the plastic still warm from being left too close to the TV. "All right," I said, rolling it in my hands. "My turn." Seth's head snapped toward me, eyes lighting up immediately. "Multiplayer." Obviously. He scooted upright on the couch, suddenly energized, and started clicking through the menu with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting for this exact sentence all day. "Cavemen vs. Raptors," he announced proudly. "No mercy." I smirked. "Bring it on." The selection screen popped up. Without hesitation, I chose Caveman. Seth didn't even glance at the other options before slamming his choice. "Raptor." "Of course," I muttered. "Fast, annoying, and bites things." "Strategic," he corrected smugly. "Also I get to eat you." "Not if I stab you first." The match loaded, the screen filling with prehistoric chaos, tribal drums pounding faintly in the background, dinosaur screeches echoing from somewhere too close for comfort. The countdown hit 0. I moved immediately, hugging the terrain, slipping behind rocks. Cavemen were slower, clunkier, but they had range. And knives, I thought as I picked up the throwing knives. Seth charged around the map like a menace, claws slashing, tail whipping as he laughed to himself. "Come on, can I?" he taunted. "Where you at?" I waited. Listened. Then I saw him, big, scaly, and completely unaware. "Found you," I murmured. I popped out from behind a boulder and unleashed a storm of flying knives into his back. Seth noticed from the split screen and tried to turn around, but it was too late. Thunk, thunk, thunk. "Hey," Seth yelped as his raptor staggered and collapsed. "First blood." I pumped a fist. "Yes, cheap," he shouted, staring at the respawn screen. "You stabbed me in the butt." "Skill issue," I said smugly. With the raptor temporarily off the field, I bolted toward the nest, eyes locked on the glowing egg resting in the center. "All right," I muttered. In and out. My caveman grabbed the egg, and immediately got tackled from the side. The screen shook violently as the raptor respawned and lunged, jaws snapping shut around my character. "Payback," Seth roared, mashing buttons like his life depended on it. My caveman screamed dramatically before being swallowed whole. I dropped my controller back slightly. "Wow," Seth cackled, throwing his hands up. "That's what you get for being sneaky. You literally ate me. Predators do that." Before I could respond, the front door opened. The sound cut through the game music instantly. Boots thumped against the floor. Grocery bags rustled. And then, "Why," Leah's voice said flatly, "does my house smell like Seth's stinky feet and digital violence?" I glanced toward the entryway just as Leah stepped into view, still in her work clothes, hair pulled back, expression already tired but sharp as ever. Sue followed behind her, arms full of grocery bags, looking amused and slightly exasperated. Leah's eyes dropped to the TV, then to the controllers, then to Seth, grinning like an idiot, then to me. She looked at the clock on the wall and crossed her arms. "You've been here for 10 minutes. I gestured weakly at the screen. It escalated quickly. Sue smiled warmly. "Cavemen and dinosaurs, raptors," Seth corrected proudly. "I ate him." Leah snorted despite herself. "Of course you did." She shook her head and headed toward the kitchen with Sue, muttering, "I leave you alone for one afternoon." Seth leaned back, smug and victorious. "Told you, worth it." I laughed, grabbing the controller again as my caveman respawned. "Let's keep going, we still got 2 lives each." He grinned. Not for long. And honestly, this was exactly how it was supposed to be. Tuesday, September 6, 2005. The next morning, the halls of Forks High were exactly what you'd expect: lockers slamming, damp jackets brushing past each other, the low hum of half-awake conversations echoing off the walls. I was halfway between classes, mentally sorting through inventory orders and employee schedules like a responsible adult, still not used to that. My parents had returned, but I was still helping at the store from time to time when a familiar blur of motion slid neatly into step beside me. Alice Cullen. She matched my stride perfectly, hands clasped behind her back, eyes bright with that particular intensity that usually meant something was coming. "Next week," she said lightly, "is Bella's birthday." I glanced sideways. "September 13th. Yeah." She smiled, pleased. "Good, that makes things easier." I slowed my pace slightly, and she adjusted without missing a beat. "We're planning a small party," she continued. "At our house. Just family, a few friends." I stopped walking. Alice stopped too, turning to face me, head tilted expectantly. "And before you say anything," she added, pointing at me, "you're not allowed to miss it." I exhaled slowly. "Alice, no excuses," she said cheerfully. "I already know you're going to try." "That's the thing," I said. "You don't." Her smile faltered just a fraction. "What?" I lowered my voice as students streamed past us. "You can't see anything that involves me. You've told me that yourself." She hesitated, then nodded. "That's true, and your visions are based on decisions," I went on. "Not accidents." Her eyes sharpened, already understanding where I was going. "And Bella," I finished, "is basically an accident generator." Alice grimaced. "Mike, I'm serious," I said. "You know how clumsy she is. She doesn't decide to get hurt. It just happens." Her gaze drifted unfocused for a second, like she was testing the future and finding only fog. "You're right," she admitted quietly. "I can't see sudden accidents. They don't register until after they happen." "And that's a problem," I said. "Because a single drop of blood in a house full of vampires is a disaster," she finished, jaw tightening. We stood there for a moment, the noise of the hallway washing around us. Then Alice straightened, resolve snapping into place. "Okay," she said firmly. "Then we control what we can." She started ticking things off on her fingers. "No sharp objects, no glass bowls, no knives anywhere near the food. Decorations will be fabric only." "Paper," I added. She frowned. Paper cuts count," I said flatly. "Bella would find a way." She let out a short huff, half laugh, half sigh. "Fine, rounded edges only, napkins included. And keep her away from anything she could trip over," I continued. "Rugs, cables, stairs." Her lips twitched despite herself. "You're exaggerating." "I am not," I said flatly. "I've seen her trip over flat ground. In daylight, while standing still." That earned me a quiet laugh, one she tried and failed to suppress. "I'll rearrange the entire house if I have to, baby-proof the whole thing," Alice said, already mentally redecorating. "Esme will help." "Good," I said. She looked at me then, really looked at me, something thoughtful and serious in her expression. "You worry about her," she said softly. I shrugged. "Someone has to. Edward's too busy brooding most of the time." That earned a small, genuine smile. "All right," she said, "you'll be there. You'll help keep things boring and safe." "Boring is ideal," I replied. "No blood, no hospital visits, no family-wide feeding frenzy." She shuddered. "When you say it like that, someone has to," I said again. Alice nodded once, decisively. "Then it's settled." She stepped back, smile returning, lighter now but still edged with concern. "And Mike?" "Yeah, thank you." I watched her disappear into the crowd, then let out a slow breath. Because Alice couldn't see accidents. And Bella. Bella was practically built out of them. Bella's birthday. Tuesday, September 13, 2005. Forks High looked exactly like it always did under an overcast sky, washed-out colors, damp pavement, and a low blanket of gray clouds hanging so close it felt like you could reach up and smudge them with your fingers. A fine mist clung to the air, not quite rain, just enough to bead on windshields and darken jackets. Students drifted across the parking lot in small clusters, shoulders hunched, backpacks slung low, voices muffled by hoodies and the hum of engines cooling down. That's when I spotted the unmistakable flash of orange. Bella's truck coughed, sputtered, and finally gave up as she turned the key off. She climbed out like she always did, careful, slightly awkward, like gravity had a personal vendetta against her. She shut the door with both hands, adjusted her jacket, and immediately got distracted trying to fix a strand of hair that the mist had plastered to her cheek. I didn't bother calling out. I crossed the space between us in long strides and caught her completely off guard, slipping an arm around her waist and lifting her clean off the ground. "Happy birthday," I announced loudly, spinning her around once, twice. "Finally 18. Welcome to the legal club." Bella let out a strangled, very unbella-like squeal, hands flying instinctively to grip my shoulders. "Mike," she gasped. "Oh my God." I grinned, undeterred, and gave her another twirl as her boots swung uselessly a few inches above the wet asphalt. "Still no drinking for you though," I added cheerfully. "Sorry. Tragic, I know." Put me down," she hissed, mortified. I felt her tense when she realized she wasn't invisible. Which, unfortunately for her, she very much was not. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye, heads turning, people slowing, a couple of juniors outright stopping to stare. Someone laughed. Someone else muttered something I didn't catch. I was pretty sure Jessica had already noticed from halfway across the lot. Bella noticed too. "Not here," she pleaded quietly, face flushing as she tried, and failed, to hide behind her hair. "Mike, people are looking." I pretended to consider it, still holding her firmly. "They're just jealous." "I'm serious," she said, voice strained. "Please, you can't do this here." She squirmed, which only made me tighten my grip slightly to keep her from slipping. Given her track record, I wasn't about to let gravity win on her birthday. "Oh, relax," I said, clearly enjoying myself. "It's a milestone. 18's important." She opened her mouth to argue again, then shut it, probably realizing I had absolutely no intention of putting her down anytime soon. So I gave her one last, exaggerated spin. Okay, I said finally, laughing. "I'll behave." I lowered her back onto her feet, but the moment her boots hit the ground, she wobbled. "Whoa," I reacted instantly, hands tightening at her arms to steady her as she pitched forward slightly. She blinked a few times, clearly dizzy, then let out a breath. "You spun me too much." "Hey," I said lightly, keeping my hands there until I was sure she wasn't going to faceplant. "That one's on you. You're the one who gets dizzy." She shot me a look that was half glare, half resigned acceptance. "I hate you," she muttered. I smiled back, completely unapologetic. "You're welcome." Around us, the parking lot had resumed its usual flow, people moving again, conversations restarting, but I could still feel a few curious glances lingering our way. Bella tugged at her jacket sleeves, trying to reclaim some dignity. "You're so annoying." "True," I said, "but now you're officially an adult. You'll get used to it." She sighed, shaking her head, and started toward the school entrance, careful with every step like she was walking on ice. I fell into step beside her, still smiling. 18. And somehow, knowing Bella, I had the uneasy feeling that just meant gravity and bad luck were about to level up too. We walked into the school together, the warmth of the building hitting us immediately, wet jackets, floor cleaner, cheap cologne, and cafeteria food that was way too early in the day to be smelling like mystery meat. The halls were already alive. Lockers slammed open and shut in uneven rhythms, voices echoed off the tile, laughter bounced from group to group. Forks high waking up for another gray Tuesday. Bella slowed as we reached her locker, shoulders already tense like she was bracing herself for something. I stayed just to her side, watching with mild curiosity. She spun the dial, tugged the handle, and chaos nearly spilled out. A cluster of balloons in every color imaginable surged forward like they'd been waiting their whole lives for this moment. Red, blue, yellow, green, strings tangling and bobbing, one of them squeaking loudly against the locker door. Right behind them, taped neatly to the inside, was a card in bold, cheerful letters. "Happy birthday, Bella." Bella froze. For half a second, she just stared, eyes wide, mortified silence stretching as a few nearby students slowed, curiosity immediately piqued. Then she lunged. No, she hissed, shoving the balloons back inside with both hands, elbows flailing as one tried to escape anyway. A girl walking past snorted. Someone else whispered. Bella slammed the locker shut and spun on me, eyes blazing. I raised both hands instantly, palms out. Hey, this time it wasn't me. She narrowed her eyes suspiciously. I nodded toward the decorations. That has Alice written all over it. As if summoned by name, I caught movement down the hall. Alice Cullen practically skipped toward us, bright smile in place, fingers laced tightly with Jasper's hand as she dragged him along like an accessory. Jasper moved easily with her, calm and composed, eyes flicking around the hallway before landing on us. Alice clapped once. You found it. Bella groaned softly. Alice. Jasper gave me a small nod. Mike. I returned it. Jasper. Then he turned to Bella, smile gentle, voice smooth and warm with that unmistakable southern drawl. Happy birthday, Bella. Her blush deepened. Thank you. Alice leaned in close to Bella, hands clasped in excitement. And that's not all. We're throwing you a party tonight. At our house. Bella's shoulders stiffened immediately. You didn't have to. Oh, but I wanted to, Alice interrupted cheerfully. And you're coming. No arguing. Bella glanced at me like she was hoping I'd intervene. I very deliberately did not. Alice tapped the locker door. And you have to wear your gift. Bella frowned. My gift. Alice nodded eagerly. It's in there. Slowly, carefully, like she was disarming a bomb, Bella opened the locker again, just enough to slide her hands inside without letting the balloons escape. One bobbed up, squeaking softly against the metal, but she shoved it back with a frustrated huff. Her fingers closed around a rectangular box wrapped in glossy, colorful paper. She pulled it out and shut the locker again with her hip. A couple of students pretended not to stare. Bella hesitated, then lifted the lid just enough to peek inside. I saw it too. Emerald green fabric, smooth and rich, catching the fluorescent hallway lights even in that tiny glimpse. Bella inhaled softly, then snapped the lid shut like the box might explode. She turned to Alice, eyes wide. Alice, you really didn't have to. Alice's smile softened, just a little, but her resolve didn't waver. I wanted to. It's your 18th birthday. Bella looked down at the box, fingers curling around the edges. For a moment, she seemed overwhelmed, caught between gratitude and her deep, ingrained discomfort with being the center of attention. She let out a quiet sigh. Thank you. Alice beamed like she'd just won something. You're welcome. Jasper squeezed Alice's hand, calm as ever, while the hallway continued buzzing around us, lockers slamming, laughter rising, the faint smell of coffee drifting in from somewhere near the teacher's lounge. Bella tucked the box under her arm, cheeks still pink, and muttered, I feel like I should apologize in advance. I smirked. Get used to it. It's your birthday. She shot me a look. You're enjoying this. Immensely, I admitted, and judging by Alice's grin. This was only just getting started. Bella hesitated for a second, clutching the box Alice had given her like a shield, then glanced around the hallway, eyes darting. Where's Edward? She asked. Alice's grin turned downright mischievous. Turn around. Bella did. Edward Cullen was leaning casually against a row of lockers a few feet behind us, like he'd been there the whole time, which, judging by literally everything about him, he probably had. He was smiling. Not the tight, polite kind either, but something softer, almost fond, his golden eyes fixed on Bella as if the rest of the hallway didn't exist. He watched her flustered panic with what could only be described as quiet amusement. I leaned slightly toward Alice and muttered under my breath, that is definitely not creepy. Edward's eyes flicked to me without losing the smile. You knew I was there the entire time. I snorted. Still creepy. He stepped away from the lockers and walked toward Bella, movements smooth and unhurried, like he wasn't navigating a crowded high school hallway full of staring teenagers. The noise around us seemed to dull as he got closer, or maybe that was just Bella zoning out. Her blush deepened immediately. Happy birthday, Edward sighed softly. He took her hand gently, fingers fitting around hers with practiced ease, and placed a small box into her palm. It was neatly wrapped, a delicate ribbon tied into a perfect bow on top, subtle, understated, and very Edward. Bella stared at it like it might dissolve. You didn't have to. I wanted to, he replied, voice warm, eyes never leaving her face. She gave a small smile then, and suddenly the hallway didn't matter. The lockers, the noise, the curious glances from passing students all faded into background static as the two of them slipped into their own little bubble. I cleared my throat loudly, but got no reaction whatsoever. All right then. Well, I said, stepping back a pace, that's my cue to retreat before I start feeling like a third wheel in a very intense romance novel. Alice laughed softly. Good idea. She hooked her arm through Jasper's again, already turning away. We'll give the lovebirds some space. Jasper inclined his head politely to Bella and Edward, then gave me a knowing look. See you later, Mike. Try not to decorate any more lockers, I said to Alice. She grinned over her shoulder. No promises. I shook my head, smiling despite myself, and headed down the hallway toward my first class, the sounds of forks high rushing back in around me. Behind me, Bella and Edward remained where they were, hands still linked, wrapped up in each other like the rest of the world could wait. Somehow, I had a feeling today was going to be long and memorable, whether Bella liked it or not. Support with power stones or comments. Turtle musical notes. 18 comments 0 vote. 'Tis but a scratch. If there was one thing the Cullens knew how to do, it was make a house feel like something out of a magazine spread while still somehow giving off the vibe of a museum where you weren't allowed to touch anything. The moment Bella and I stepped inside, the door closing softly behind us, the air changed. It wasn't just colder, though it was, but cleaner. Sharper. Pine and stone and something faintly floral, layered over the ever-present scent of vampires. Not unpleasant exactly, well, alright, slightly unpleasant for me, and very distinct. Like snow that had never been walked on, or metal after rain. I still noticed it, but had learned to ignore it. Bella, on the other hand, stiffened almost imperceptibly beside me. The Cullens were already there. All of them. Esme hovered near the staircase, smiling warmly, hands clasped together like she'd been waiting for this moment all day. Carlisle stood close by, relaxed and welcoming, the picture of calm authority. Rosalie leaned against the wall near the piano, arms crossed, expression carefully neutral. Emmett looked like he was barely restraining himself from clapping someone on the back, or breaking something by accident. Jasper stood slightly apart, posture loose but eyes alert, while Alice practically vibrated with excitement near the coffee table. Edward never left Bella's side. Soft music played somewhere in the background, something instrumental, slow and elegant, the kind of song you didn't notice until it stopped. Candles flickered throughout the room, their flames steady despite the lack of any breeze, casting warm light that softened the modern lines of the house. It was a lot. I glanced around, taking it all in, then felt a familiar absence settle in my chest. Leah wasn't here. I'd known she wouldn't be, of course. I'd asked anyway, it felt wrong not to, but her answer had been immediate and firm. Too many vamps, she'd said, arms crossed, expression unimpressed. And that smell, no offense, but I'm not built for that. I'd laughed, told her I got it, and meant it. She hadn't said it harshly. Just honest. Leah wasn't the type to force herself into situations that made her uncomfortable, and I respected that. Hell, if the roles were reversed, I probably wouldn't love being trapped in a house full of predators either, no matter how well-behaved they were. Still, she hadn't skipped the occasion entirely. I shifted slightly, the weight of a small, carefully wrapped bag still tucked under my arm. The gift she'd sent for Bella. A sleek bottle of perfume, elegant and subtle. Leah had handed it to me with a crooked grin. Tell her it's something light, she'd said. Good for everyday wear. Then, after a beat, she'd added with a smirk. And maybe it'll help cover the leech smell. I'd rolled my eyes and snorted, but I'd also made a mental note to never repeat that last part out loud. Ever. Some thoughts were better kept firmly inside my head, safely behind the protection of St. Rick Astley, but why is he wearing gray robes today and holding a staff? And the song is slightly different as well. Never gonna let you pass. Bella squeezed my arm lightly, pulling me back to the present. Everyone's staring, she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. I glanced around. They were, not in a hostile way, more like curious, fond, expectant. Like this was a carefully planned moment and she was the centerpiece. You'll survive, I whispered back. Probably. She shot me a look. Alice clapped her hands sharply, the sound cutting clean through the room. Okay, everyone's here, no one's bleeding. Bella flinched. Yet, Alice corrected quickly, then waved it off. Kidding, mostly. Emmett laughed out loud. I closed my eyes for half a second. This was going to be a long night. Edward's hand tightened reassuringly around Bella's, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles. She relaxed a little at that, shoulders easing, though her eyes still darted around the room like she was expecting something to go wrong at any second. Fair. Statistically speaking, that was a reasonable assumption. I cleared my throat lightly and stepped forward, lifting the gift bag. Before things get, whatever Alice has planned, I said, this is from Leah. Bella turned to me, surprise flashing across her face. Leah. I nodded. She wanted to be here. Just, from a very safe distance. Bella smiled softly, genuinely touched, as she accepted the bag. Tell her thank you for me. I will, I said. And not the rest. As Bella peeked inside, the room hummed quietly around us, soft music, murmured voices, the faint crackle of candles. Outside, the forest loomed dark and endless beyond the glass walls, rain whispering against the windows like it was listening in. A birthday party, in a house full of vampires. What could possibly go wrong? The thing about situations like this is that you know, absolutely, bone deep know, that something is going to go wrong. You just don't know how yet. The Cullens' living room looked like something out of a magazine Alice probably kept hidden somewhere, wide open, flooded with soft afternoon light filtering through the tall windows, everything arranged just a little too perfectly. Bella sat on the couch, hands folded awkwardly in her lap, already embarrassed, and the party hadn't even officially started. Her brown eyes kept darting around the room, landing briefly on each vampire before flicking away again. I stayed close, probably too close, but I didn't care. If hovering could prevent a disaster, I was prepared to hover like my life depended on it. Esme reappeared from the kitchen then, moving with that effortless grace that still made my spine itch. She carried a cake so pretty it almost seemed criminal to eat it, white frosting, delicate chocolate piping, a cluster of candles glowing softly on top. Happy birthday, she said warmly, and then everyone joined in. Every single one of them. The Cullens' voices blended together in a way that shouldn't have worked, too smooth, too controlled, but somehow it did. Bella's face went crimson almost immediately. She ducked her head, shoulders hunching as if she could physically shrink away from the attention. I couldn't help smiling. She looked like she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. When the song ended, Esme set the cake down carefully on the table in front of Bella. The candle flames flickered, reflecting in golden and crimson eyes around the room. Make a wish, Alice chimed, already vibrating with excitement. Bella leaned forward. Too far. Careful, I blurted, reaching out instinctively, but she'd already blown. The flames went out in a rush of warm air, and for half a second everything seemed fine. Then she recoiled with a sharp inhale, scrunching her nose. Oh, she muttered. Her nose had gone bright red, like she'd stuck it too close to a campfire. I winced. You okay? I'm fine, she said quickly, waving it off, though she was rubbing at it with the back of her hand. Edward was already there, concern etched too clearly across his face, but there was no blood, no scream, no sudden chaos, so the moment passed. Too easily, in hindsight. Presents came next. This was the part I'd been bracing myself for. I stayed glued to Bella's side as she started opening them, earning myself an eye roll that was very Bella. I'm not a toddler, Mike, she muttered under her breath. I know, I said, not budging. Toddlers are tougher, less prone to accidents and paper cuts. Emmett snorted from across the room. The stereo from Emmett and Rosalie came first, only the box though. Bella raised an eyebrow in confusion. Emmett grinned. Already installed it in your truck. Figured you deserved something that didn't sound like it was dying every time you hit a bump. I glanced at Rosalie. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. If I had to guess, Emmett had done most of the convincing, and the buying. Bella was already wearing Alice and Jasper's gift, a beautiful emerald dress. Edward's gift was quieter, a simple CD case. I recorded it, he said softly. Just, things I thought you'd like. Bella looked at it like it was something fragile and priceless. That expression alone made my chest tighten. Then came Carlisle and Esme's gift, wrapped in simple paper. Paper. Nope, I said instantly, grabbing it the moment Bella picked it up. Mike, she protested. Careful with paper cuts, I said firmly, already tearing into it myself. Good call, Emmett laughed. Edward shook his head, smiling to himself, while Bella crossed her arms, clearly offended, but she didn't try to take it back from me. What was inside nearly made her cry, 2 plane tickets to Jacksonville so she could visit her mother. I watched Bella blink rapidly, swallowing hard. Thank you, she whispered. Then came the last gift, mine. It was a simple leather bracelet I made myself. On the inside were the words, Friends Forever, in slightly crooked letters. She wore it immediately and said she loved it. And that should have been the end of it. It should have. Bella stood up, probably to thank everyone properly, and somehow managed to trip over absolutely nothing. I reacted without thinking, arms shooting out as I caught her against my chest. "I've got you," I said automatically. Then I felt it. Something wet on my fingers. A sharp inhale from Bella. I looked down. A thin red line bloomed on her arm, right where my nails had scraped her skin. Time stopped. The smell hit next. Warm, metallic, human. My mind exploded into pure, unfiltered panic. Fuck. No, why, damn it. Motherfucker. Every vampire in the room froze. Like statues carved from ice. I looked at Jasper first, heart hammering, expecting him to be the problem. His jaw was tight, eyes focused, Alice gripping his hand like an anchor. He was holding. Barely, but he was holding. Edward wasn't. The sound he made wasn't human. It was a low, broken snarl that seemed to tear out of his chest. "Edward," Carlyle started, moving to intercept. But he was too slow. Edward hit him like a missile. There was a crash of glass and wood as Carlyle went flying through the window, disappearing into the trees outside. Everything erupted at once. Emmett and Rosalie lunged, Esme right behind them, all three of them grappling Edward, forcing him away from Bella. Edward fought like something feral, eyes black, teeth bared, every muscle screaming hunt. I placed Bella behind me without thinking, my body shaking, heart pounding so hard it tasted like copper in my mouth. I prepared to shift at any time. Alice didn't move from Jasper's side, her fingers white-knuckled in his sleeve as she whispered urgently to him. Jasper wasn't breathing, but he could probably feel everyone's bloodthirst. The fact that he'd fed earlier was probably the only thing keeping him grounded. After what felt like an eternity, but couldn't have been more than a minute, Edward stilled. The tension snapped, the blackness drained from his eyes, and horror flooded his face. He looked at Bella, really looked, and the fear he saw in her face broke him. His voice cracked. He wrenched himself free and was gone in a blur, the front door slamming so hard the house shuddered. Silence fell. The cake sat forgotten. Bella stared at the floor, pale and shaken. And just like that, the birthday party was over. I couldn't stop thinking that this was my fault. Not bad luck, not fate, me. If I hadn't interfered, if I hadn't kept stepping in, nudging things just slightly off course, Edward would have already been tested. He would have known his limits. He would have faced the scent of Bella's blood before tonight, in a controlled moment, instead of having it slammed into him without warning. But because of me, he hadn't. I'd rewritten that part of the story without even realizing it. Smoothed the path, removed the danger, wrapped Bella in so much metaphorical bubble wrap that when the real test finally came, it hit like a sledgehammer. And Edward broke. The image wouldn't leave my head. Carlyle flying through glass, Edward's face twisted into something inhuman, the way the room had filled with that sharp, coppery scent that still seemed to cling to the back of my throat. Every detail replayed on a loop, merciless. I'd meant to protect her. That was always the excuse, wasn't it? Hovering, intervening, catching her before she fell, grabbing gifts before they could cut her, acting like I could outthink a world that ran on instincts far older and stronger than mine. And in the end, the one time I did touch her, I'd been the cause. A stupid, careless scratch. Barely anything, but it had been enough. I glanced at Bella, still standing too still, like if she moved the whole moment might come crashing back down on her. Edward was gone, fled in shame and horror, and that absence felt louder than the chaos had. I swallowed hard. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. And for the first time since I'd started meddling, really meddling, it hit me just how fragile the balance was, and how easily my good intentions could turn into a match dropped into dry grass. I hadn't just changed the story. I'd delayed the inevitable, and made it worse when it finally arrived. Well, shit, that just happened. Don't forget to support with Power Stones or comments turtle musical notes. 37 comments 0 vote. Hands-on therapy. Leah. By the time Mike got home, it was already dark. Not Forks dark, that happened around 4 in the afternoon, but real night. The kind where the house settled into itself, the wind brushing against the walls like it was testing them, the forest outside breathing slow and deep. I was already in his bed, not asleep, just waiting. His room smelled like him, soap, wood, the smell of the forest clung to everything he owned, but I guess I was the same now. The window was cracked open, curtains shifting lazily with the breeze. I lay on my side, chin propped on my hand, listening for his car. When I finally heard it crunch into the gravel, I exhaled. The front door opened and closed quietly. Too quietly. That was the first red flag. His footsteps were slow as he made his way up the stairs, none of his usual careless noise, none of the absent-minded humming or muttering. When he pushed the bedroom door open, he paused like he hadn't expected me to be there. Then his shoulders sagged. "Hey," I said softly. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Mike didn't really do physically exhausted anymore, but emotionally wrung out. His jaw was tight, eyes dulled, like he'd been replaying something over and over in his head and losing every time. I sat up, pulling the blanket higher around myself. "How'd it go?" He didn't answer right away. He crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, hands clasped together so tightly his knuckles looked pale. "Bad," he said finally. That single word carried way too much weight. I shifted closer. "Bad how?" And then he started talking. He told me about the party. About the Cullens' house, the cake, the gifts. About how careful he'd been, hovering like a paranoid parent, watching Bella's every move. And then he told me about the blood. How Bella bled because he scratched her accidentally. And how the smell had set Edward off, enough to send Carlisle flying through a window in order to get his fangs on Bella. The way the whole thing had detonated in seconds. His voice stayed steady at first, like he was just listing facts, but I could hear the cracks underneath. The anger turned inward, sharp and vicious. "It's my fault," he said, staring at the floor. "If I hadn't interfered, if I hadn't kept trying to meddle." He laughed once, bitter and hollow. "I thought I was helping. I thought I was being careful." I watched him spiral, watched the way his shoulders curled in on themselves like he was trying to make himself smaller, easier to blame. "I shouldn't have been there," he went on. "I shouldn't have touched her. I shouldn't have." I slapped him hard. The sound cracked through the room, sharp and final. His head snapped to the side. He stared at me, stunned, one hand flying up to his cheek. "What the hell?" he said. "Leah, why did you do that?" I didn't answer. I just slapped him again, right across the other cheek, the one he wasn't covering. "Still don't understand?" I asked calmly. His eyes were wide now, more shocked than angry. I raised my hand again, letting him see it, feel the thread of it hanging there. He lifted both hands in surrender. All right, I get it." I raised an eyebrow, waiting. He swallowed, then sighed. "I shouldn't blame myself for things I can't control," he said. "I can't predict every outcome. I'm not responsible for everyone else's instincts." I slapped him again. He groaned. "Ow, why?" "Because sometimes people needed to be snapped out of their own heads." I burst out laughing before I could stop myself. "Wow," I said, shaking my head. "Now I understand why you like slapping my ass so much." He blinked. Then he laughed too, tension breaking like a snapped wire. "Oh, that's what this is about," he said, grinning despite himself. Before I could react, he lunged forward, tackling me back against the bed. The mattress bounced as his weight pinned me down, his hands bracketing my shoulders. "I'll have to pay you back for those slaps then," he said, voice light again, eyes finally alive. "Try it," I shot back, pushing at him. We wrestled, laughing, limbs tangled, the heaviness finally bleeding out of the room. His laugh was warm against my neck, familiar and grounding, and for the first time since he walked in, he felt here again. Not stuck in the past. Not drowning in guilt, just Mike. And I held on to that, because sometimes all you could do was knock sense into the people you loved, and then remind them they weren't alone. Wednesday, September 14, 2005. Mike. If you ignored everything that mattered, the day was completely normal. Forks High looked the same under its eternal blanket of gray. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Teachers droned on about things no one cared about. Lockers slammed, laughter echoed, gossip slithered through the hallways like it always did. Teenagers being teenagers. I moved through it all on autopilot. People talked around me, about homework, about the party rumors that had already mutated into something unrecognizable. Some complained about not being invited, some gossiped about how something definitely happened at the Cullens' house, but no one actually knew anything. Not really. I didn't bother to correct them. What was the point? It wasn't until lunch that I felt the difference. The cafeteria smelled like overcooked fries, disinfectant, and wet clothes drying badly. Trays clattered. Someone shouted across the room. A milk carton exploded somewhere behind me. And then I saw Bella. She was sitting at the Cullen table all alone. That stopped me cold for half a second. The Cullens' table was usually a study in controlled perfection, empty seats with invisible, reserved, signs, golden heads bent together, their little bubble of untouchable calm. Now it looked wrong. Too big, too quiet. Bella sat with her shoulders slightly hunched, hands wrapped around an untouched tray. Her gaze was unfocused, fixed on nothing, like she was waiting for something that wasn't coming. Edward's seat was empty, so were the rest of theirs. So I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my tray and crossed the cafeteria, ignoring the looks that followed me. A few whispers trailed behind. Isn't that Mike? Is he allowed to sit there? But I didn't care. I dropped into the seat beside her. She startled slightly, then relaxed when she realized it was me. "Oh," she said softly. Hey, I replied. Up close, she looked worse. Pale in that quiet, exhausted way. Eyes shadowed, like she hadn't slept, or like sleep hadn't helped. I glanced around the empty table. "So, where's Edward?" I asked. "And the rest of them?" The moment the words left my mouth, I knew. Her mouth trembled just barely. "Wrong question. I haven't seen him," she said, voice thin. "Since yesterday." My stomach sank. She stared down at her hands. I tried calling Alice. She answered, but she didn't really say anything. Just that Edward hadn't come back yet. That I shouldn't worry. That he would come around. She swallowed. But that's all. She didn't even say they weren't coming today. The noise of the cafeteria faded into something distant and dull. Bella drew a slow breath, then whispered, "It's my fault, isn't it?" I stiffened. "If I wasn't so clumsy," she went on, voice cracking, "if I hadn't tripped." Oh hell no. For half a second, Leah's solution flashed through my mind. A sharp slap, reset button, brutal honesty. Then I looked at Bella. At her fragile human bones. At my hands, big, way too big, definitely not calibrated for corrective violence. "Yeah, no." I cleared my throat instead. "You know," I said carefully, "I spent most of last night thinking the exact same thing." She looked up at me, surprised. I blamed myself, I admitted. Thought if I hadn't interfered, if I hadn't been hovering, if I hadn't touched you at all, none of it would have happened. Her brows knit together. "Then Leah slapped me," I added. She blinked. What? "Yeah," I said. "She slapped some sense into my head, thrice." Bella stared. "She called it therapy," I continued solemnly. "Very hands-on approach." I hesitated, then nodded toward her. "You want to try it?" Her eyes widened instantly. She slapped both hands over her cheeks and stared at me in horror, then glanced pointedly at my hands. "Oh God, no," she said quickly. "You'd probably kill me with those bare hands of yours." I snorted. Yeah, that was my conclusion too. That got a small laugh out of her. Just a breath of one, but it was real. Her shoulders loosened a fraction. The tight knot in her expression eased, just a little. For one brief moment, sitting there with cafeteria noise crashing back in around us, it felt normal. Things were definitely not fixed. Hell, they weren't even a bit better. But now they felt survivable. And I'd take that. Support with Power Stones or comments. Turtle musical notes. 18 comments, 0 vote. The only option left. When the final bell rang, my good mood lasted exactly until I reached the parking lot. The air was cool and damp, that familiar Forks mist clinging to everything, cars beaded with moisture, asphalt darkened as if it had soaked up the sky. Students drifted past me in noisy clusters, laughter and slammed doors echoing between rows of vehicles. It should have been just another Wednesday. Then I saw her. Alice Cullen was leaning against my car, arms folded loosely, posture deceptively relaxed. If you didn't know her, you might have thought she was just waiting for a ride. But I knew better. Alice never showed up unannounced without the universe preparing to punch someone in the gut. My smile faded before I even reached her. It wasn't that I didn't like Alice. Hell, most days she was the brightest thing in any room she entered. But today her eyes were sharp, focused somewhere far ahead, like she was bracing for impact. No bounce in her step. No excited grin. Just tension, wound tight beneath porcelain skin. That never meant anything good. "Hello, Mike," she said. Her voice was polite, smooth, but the usual cheer was gone, stripped away like color from a photograph. "Hey, Alice," I replied, forcing something casual into my tone. "Good to see you. You need something?" As if on cue, I heard the unmistakable sound of Bella's truck door opening. I glanced over my shoulder just in time to see her climb out. Her expression was full of concern as she started walking toward us. She had been about to leave when she noticed Alice. Alice noticed her too. "Could we talk somewhere else?" she asked quietly. She lifted a hand and gave Bella a small wave, too small, too controlled to be reassuring, before opening my passenger door and slipping inside my car without waiting for an answer. I let out a slow breath and looked back at Bella. "Sorry," I mouthed, offering an apologetic shrug. Bella hesitated, then nodded, though the worry in her eyes didn't fade. I could practically hear the questions screaming in her head as I got into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine rumbled to life. I pulled out of the lot and headed toward the trees lining the road, the school disappearing in the rearview mirror. For a few seconds, the only sound was the car's engine and the faint whir of the heater fighting off the chill. Neither of us minded the cold, but I still turned it on out of habit. "All right," I said finally, breaking the silence. "Talk. What's going on?" Alice bit her lip. That alone was enough to make my shoulders tense. Alice Cullen didn't hesitate unless the future was actively refusing to cooperate. "Edward wants us to leave Forks," she said. The words hit heavy, like a punch I'd seen coming and still failed to block. I exhaled slowly and dragged a hand through my hair. "Yeah," I muttered. I was afraid he'd pull something stupid like that. The forest closed in around the road as we turned, tall evergreens swallowing sound, sunlight dimming into a muted green haze. I glanced at her from the corner of my eye. "But what do you expect me to do?" I continued. "It's not like I can stop him if he's set his mind on it." Alice's hands were clenched in her lap now, fingers interlaced tightly enough that I could see the tension even without superhuman eyesight. "You can try," she said softly. I snorted. "That's not exactly a plan." "It's the only one," she insisted, turning to face me fully now. Her golden eyes were intense, almost pleading. "Every other option ends the same way." I frowned. "In this one," she hesitated. "I can't see the future where you interfere," she admitted. "Nothing. It's blank." Her voice dropped. "But that's why it matters. It's the only path that isn't already decided." That made my grip tighten on the steering wheel. Alice wasn't scared easily. If she was asking for uncertainty, it meant the alternatives were worse than anything unseen. "Please," she said, "just try to make him see sense. Even if you fail, it's better than not trying at all." The familiar gravel path to the Cullen house came into view, winding through the trees like a private artery cut into the forest. I groaned as I turned onto it. "Great," I muttered. "Guess I'm going to talk sense into the world's most stubborn century-old vampire." "You're our best option," Alice said quietly. I parked the car and shut off the engine, the sudden silence pressing in around us. "All right," I said after a moment. "I'll see what I can do." I glanced at her, one corner of my mouth lifting. "And if words fail, maybe a little hands-on therapy will help." Alice let out a small, almost genuine smile. "Just don't hurt him too badly." "No promises," I replied, pushing the door open. "Depends on how hard he makes it." She sighed, that smile fading into something strained. "I fear you'd have to kill him, then." I paused, one foot on the ground, and looked back at her. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that," I said. But even as I stepped out of the car, the weight in my chest told me hope wasn't exactly on our side. Sorry about the extra short chapter. I'm a bit busy with New Year's preparations. Happy New Year by the way, still 10 hours to go here, but in some places I guess it's already 2026. Turtle musical notes. 25 comments 0 vote. Matters of the soul. We pulled up in front of the Cullen house just as the forest light shifted, late afternoon bleeding slowly into that eternal Forks twilight. The house looked the same as always, all glass and clean lines tucked too neatly into the trees, like it didn't quite belong to the world around it. Alice reached for the door handle. I caught her wrist gently. "Wait." She blinked at me, confused for half a second, then let her hand fall back into her lap. "I've got this," I said. I stepped out, shut the car door, and walked up to the front porch. The wood beneath my boots barely creaked, even though it should have. Everything about this place was built to accommodate creatures that didn't make noise. I knocked. Almost immediately, the door opened. Esme Cullen stood there, warm smile already in place, eyes soft and welcoming like she'd been expecting guests all along. The house behind her smelled faintly of clean wood, flowers, and the unmistakable vampire scent. I cleared my throat and put on my absolute best kid voice. The one that belonged on a playground, not in front of a centuries-old vampire matriarch. "Hello, Mrs. Cullen," I said politely. "Can Edward come out to play?" For half a second, Esme's lips twitched. Then her eyes crinkled at the corners as she fought it, pressing her mouth into a thin line like she was trying very hard to be responsible. "Why, of course, Mike," she said, playing along beautifully. "Let me call him." She turned her head toward the staircase and raised her voice. Edward, Mike's here to play. That was as far as her composure lasted. She laughed, bright and genuine, the sound filling the house like music finally let loose. From upstairs came Emmett's booming laughter, loud enough that I could practically feel it vibrating through the walls. Somewhere behind me, Alice snorted softly, shaking her head in amused disbelief. When Edward appeared at the top of the stairs, his posture was rigid, his expression carefully neutral. He was trying very hard to look long-suffering and dignified. But his lip betrayed him, twitching again and again. He descended the stairs with measured steps, eyes flicking briefly toward Esme, who was still smiling far too innocently, then to Alice, who was openly grinning now, and finally to me. "Mike," he said, voice controlled. "What do you want?" I didn't answer right away. I just jerked my head toward the forest, where the trees stood dense and quiet, shadows pooling between trunks. "Let's walk," I suggested. He studied me for a moment, then nodded once. We didn't say anything as we stepped off the porch and into the trees. The forest swallowed sound quickly, needles crunching softly beneath our feet, damp earth releasing that deep, rich smell of moss and rain. Birds flitted overhead, wings whispering. The air felt heavier here, thicker, like the woods were listening. We walked at a normal pace. No supernatural speed, no rushing. It felt intentional, like we both knew the conversation couldn't start until the house was well behind us. When the Cullen home was nothing but a vague shape through the trees, Edward finally spoke. "If this is you trying to stop me from leaving," he said quietly, "it won't work." I stopped walking. He took 2 more steps before realizing I wasn't beside him anymore. He turned, brows knitting slightly. I looked at him straight on. "Do you think you'll be happy away from Bella?" The question hit harder than I expected. I could see it in his face. The way his jaw tightened. The way his shoulders sagged just a fraction. He exhaled slowly. "No," he admitted, "but she'll be safer without me." I tilted my head. "She could also be safe if you turned her." That did it. Edward's eyes hardened instantly, something sharp flashing behind them. "Turn her," he snapped, "into a soulless monster. Condemn her to a cursed existence." I didn't raise my voice. I just held his gaze. "Is that really what you think of your family?" I asked calmly. "That they're monsters?" He hesitated. "Sweet Alice," I continued, nodding back toward the house. "Always cheering everyone up, always trying to help. Jasper, who fights himself every single day and still shows restraint. Emmett, who has the heart and honesty of a kid most of the time." I paused, then added, "Rosalie, well, Rosalie is Rosalie." Edward huffed despite himself. "Esme," I went on, "who treats everyone like they're her children. Carlisle, who gave you a second chance, a life, a family. Who never stopped believing you could be more." I stepped closer. "Do you seriously see them as monsters?" Edward's eyes widened. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. He closed it again, swallowing hard. "Yeah," I said quietly. "That's what I thought." For a moment, all I could hear was the forest. Wind through branches, the distant tap of something moving across bark. Then Edward spoke again, voice lower now. "I've killed people, Mike." I didn't interrupt. "There was a time," he continued, "when I left the coven. When I fed on humans." He looked away, shame etched deep into his features. "I don't deserve her." I studied him for a second, then asked, already knowing the answer, "What kind of people?" Edward hesitated, then said, "I read their minds first. Every time. Murderers, rapists, people who had already destroyed lives." I nodded slowly. "You know," I said, "if I could read minds and came across people like that, I'd have a really hard time stopping myself." I met his eyes again. "Actually, no, I'd almost certainly kill them." He flinched slightly. "Do you think that makes me a monster?" I asked. Edward's shoulders slumped. He looked down at the forest floor, voice barely above a whisper. "No," he said, "you're a good person, Mike." "So are you," I replied without hesitation. The words hung between us, heavy and unavoidable. And for the first time since we started walking, Edward didn't argue back. Edward ran a hand through his hair, fingers dragging hard enough to tug at it. "But what about her soul, Mike?" he asked quietly. "We might not be evil monsters, but we're still cursed." The word lingered between us, heavy and bitter. I didn't answer right away. I stared past him, at the trees, at the way the forest seemed endlessly alive, every leaf and root humming with quiet purpose. Then I took a slow breath. "I never told you this," I said carefully, "but I can walk as a spirit." Edward blinked. I turned back to him. Not metaphorically, literally. I can leave my body behind and move with just my soul. It was the original ability of the Quileute tribe, until someone lost his body doing it and asked a wolf to share his. His expression shifted from grief to confusion. That's not possible. I know what it sounds like, I replied. But when I'm like that, I can feel other people's spirits. Their presence, their shape, their weight. I hesitated, then met his eyes. How about I do it now? Edward stiffened. You mean right here? Yes, I said. I'll leave my body. I'll feel your soul. When I come back, you can read my mind and feel what I felt by yourself. He stared at me for a long moment, disbelief written all over his face. Is there really such a thing as a soul you can touch? I wouldn't offer if there wasn't, I said. Silence stretched. Finally, Edward nodded once, sharp and decisive. All right. I moved to the base of a thick cedar and lowered myself to the ground, leaning my back against its trunk. The bark was cold and rough through my jacket. Familiar. Grounding. Just, don't let anything happen to my body, I muttered. Edward gave a humorless smile. I think I can manage that. I closed my eyes. I focused inward, on that familiar pull, that loosening sensation I had known my whole life. The world slipped sideways. Weight vanished. Then freedom hit me. It always did. My senses exploded outward, sharper, purer. I felt the forest like it was an extension of myself. Roots burrowed deep into the earth, trees stretching skyward, the slow breathing of the world itself. There was no cold, no heaviness, no pain. It was intoxicating. For a moment, I almost forgot why I had done this. Then I turned my attention to Edward. He stood exactly where I had left him, staring down at my body with visible confusion. My physical form looked wrong from this perspective. Empty, like a shell someone had stepped out of and forgotten. It was still breathing, as if asleep, but I could feel its emptiness. I drifted closer to him and reached out with my senses. And felt absolutely nothing. No warmth, no resonance, no echo. It was like staring at a chair, at a statue, at a machine that had learned how to move convincingly. No, I thought immediately. No, no, no. I pushed harder, focusing deeper, searching desperately for anything. A spark, a flicker, even the faintest trace of a spirit. But there was nothing. Edward Cullen did not have a soul. Panic slammed into me. How was that possible? How could something that spoke, that loved, that suffered so deeply be empty like that? Then the answers started lining up, one after another, cruel and logical. They didn't breathe. They didn't bleed. Their hearts didn't beat. They didn't age. They didn't grow. They were frozen, locked forever into the moment they were turned. They didn't even truly live the way living things did. But did that make them monsters? Did that make them less? My thoughts spiraled. What am I going to tell him? I can't let him see this. I pulled back fast, retreating from the forest, from the endless living hum, slamming myself back into my body like diving into ice. My eyes snapped open. I sucked in a breath I didn't need but desperately wanted, heart pounding as if I had run miles. Edward was watching me intently. Well, he demanded, what did you see? Panic took over. Before he could read my thoughts, I started singing in my head as loudly as I possibly could. You know the rules and so do I. Edward groaned. Mike, seriously. I clamped down harder. I just want to tell you how I'm feeling. Stop that, he said irritably. What did you see? I doubled down. Gotta make you understand. Never gonna give you up. Never gonna let you down. Never gonna turn around and desert you. Edward froze. Slow realization dawned on his face. His expression collapsed into something hollow and resigned. You didn't find anything, he said softly. Did you? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I don't have a soul, he continued. Not angry, not shocked, just tired. I never did. He turned away from me and took a step toward the trees. Edward, wait, I shouted, scrambling to my feet. You can't tell your family. This would destroy them. He didn't stop. And this doesn't change who you are, I added desperately. It doesn't define you. It does, he replied, voice flat. It proves what I've always feared. He glanced back once, eyes dark and distant. I'm no better than a machine. He hesitated. I won't tell them, he said quietly. But I can't stay. I just can't. Then he was gone, vanishing into the forest without sound. I stood there alone, the silence crushing. My shoulders sagged, the adrenaline drained out of me all at once, leaving only exhaustion and dread. I had come here to change things. To fix something. Instead, I had confirmed his worst fear. I stared at the empty space where Edward had been and swallowed hard. What was he going to do now, knowing the truth? And what had I just set in motion? 27 comments 0 vote. The weight of knowing. The walk back to the Cullens' house felt longer than it should have. The forest path was quiet, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ears until your own thoughts grew too loud. Fallen leaves crunched under my shoes with every step, the sound sharp and out of place in the stillness. Edward had disappeared in the opposite direction without a word, moving so fast he might as well have dissolved into the trees. 1 second he was there, shoulders tense and jaw locked, and the next he was gone. I stood there for a moment after he left, staring at the space he had occupied, my chest tight. Damn it, Edward. By the time the Cullens' house came into view, the anger had drained out of me, replaced by something heavier. Something closer to exhaustion. The large glass walls reflected the gray sky above, making the place look colder than usual, despite the warmth I knew waited inside. I knocked. The door opened almost immediately. Esme stood there, hands folded loosely in front of her, her posture hopeful in a way that made my stomach twist. Her eyes searched my face. Well, she asked softly. I swallowed and shook my head. I couldn't convince him. Her shoulders sagged, just a little, but enough that I noticed. It was subtle, the kind of movement most people would miss, but it hit me like a punch to the ribs. She forced a small smile, nodding as if she had expected this outcome all along. I see, she said gently. Thank you for trying, Mike. Truly. I stepped inside, the door closing behind me with a quiet click. Alice appeared almost instantly, like she always did, eyes bright but cautious. She took one look at my expression and sighed. Yeah, she said, that tracks. I'm sorry, I said, running a hand through my hair. I really thought I could get through to him. You did, she replied quickly, stepping closer. Just not in the way we wanted. Edward hears things, he just chooses what to listen to. Carlyle stood a few steps back, arms crossed loosely, his expression calm but heavy. He inclined his head toward me. You did more than most would, he said. Edward values your opinion, even if he does not always show it. Emmett leaned against the staircase railing, arms folded, his usual grin nowhere to be found. He huffed out a breath. He's being an idiot, he muttered. A noble idiot, sure, but still an idiot. Rosalie said nothing. She stood near the window, staring outside, her reflection faintly visible in the glass. Jasper lingered close to Alice, one hand resting lightly at her back, his expression unreadable. And Esme. I couldn't stop looking at her. She moved quietly through the room, straightening something that did not need straightening, smoothing a pillow that was already perfect. Her eyes were downcast now, her lips pressed together as if she were holding something in. Worry, maybe, or fear. They do not have a soul. The thought hit me again, just as hard as it had in the forest. I watched her for a moment longer, my chest tightening. If someone had told me that this woman was soulless, I would have laughed in their face. The way she looked at her family, the way she radiated care and concern, it made no sense. None at all. If that was what being soulless looked like, then the word had lost all meaning. Alice broke the silence, her voice light but sincere. Hey, don't beat yourself up over this, okay? You did what you could. Edward's been stubborn since 1918. That earned a weak snort from Emmett. I managed a small smile, though it felt forced. Yeah, guess I walked into that one. She stepped closer and reached out, squeezing my arm. Thank you for trying anyway. It means more than you know. I nodded, suddenly feeling very tired. I should probably head out, I said. Give you all some space. Carlyle inclined his head again. You are always welcome here, Mike. Yeah, Emmett added, even when you are delivering bad news. Esme finally looked up at me, her eyes soft, sad, and kind. Take care of yourself, she said. And thank you. From all of us. My throat tightened. I nodded once, afraid that if I spoke, something embarrassing might come out instead. I left shortly after, the door closing quietly behind me. The cold air outside hit my face, sharp and grounding. I shoved my hands into my jacket pockets and started walking to my car. My thoughts felt tangled, messy, and wrong. Edward was leaving. Bella was going to be hurt. And somehow, knowing that the people I had just spoken to were supposed to be soulless made me feel worse, not better. I exhaled slowly, breath fogging in front of me. I felt like shit. And no amount of logic seemed capable of fixing that. I didn't hesitate. As soon as I left the Cullens' house, I got into my car and drove straight toward Bella's place. The engine's low hum did nothing to calm my thoughts. My hands gripped the steering wheel harder than necessary as the trees blurred past, my mind replaying everything that had gone wrong. I knew how this was supposed to happen if no one warned her. Edward would leave her in the middle of the forest, lost and emotionally broken. And I refused to let that be her reality. Bella's house was quiet when I pulled into the driveway. No lights were on inside, except for one upstairs. Charlie's cruiser wasn't there. Relief and dread tangled in my chest as I shut off the engine and stepped out into the cool evening air. I knocked. After a moment, the door opened, and Bella stood there, wearing an oversized sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked tired, but she smiled when she saw me. "Hey, Mike," she said. "What are you doing here? Can we talk?" I asked. "Somewhere private." Her smile faded just a little. She nodded and stepped aside. "Yeah, come in." The house felt emptier than usual. Too quiet. She led me to the living room and sat on the couch, folding her legs beneath her. I stayed standing for a second, trying to gather the courage to say what I came here to say. She watched me closely. "You look serious." "I went to see Edward," I said. Her face brightened immediately. "You did? How is he?" That was the moment I wished I could lie. "Not good," I said softly. Her shoulders tensed. "What do you mean?" I sat down across from her, leaning forward, my hands clasped together. "Bella, I need you to know that I'm telling you this because I care about you. I don't want to hurt you." Her lips pressed together. "Just tell me." I took a breath. "Edward is planning on leaving." The words landed hard. She stared at me, unblinking, as if her brain hadn't caught up yet. "Leaving," she repeated quietly. "Leaving where?" "Forks," I said. "You." Her head shook, slow and disbelieving. "No, he wouldn't do that. He promised me." "I know," I said quickly. I reminded him of that. I tried to convince him to stay. Her eyes locked onto mine. "Tried? I went for a walk with him," I explained. "I told him you'd be safer with him here. That leaving you would hurt you more than staying ever could." I hesitated before adding, "I don't think it worked. I think I might have made things worse." Her hands curled into the fabric of her sweater. "Worse how?" "He's convinced he doesn't deserve you," I said. "That loving you puts you in danger." Nothing I said could change his mind. Her breath hitched. She looked down at her lap, blinking rapidly. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "So he's just going to disappear." "I don't know exactly when," I said. "But soon." "I didn't want you to be blindsided. I didn't want him to leave you without warning." Her shoulders began to shake. Tears spilled over despite her obvious effort to hold them back. She wiped at her cheeks angrily, like she was frustrated with herself for crying. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew something was wrong." "I'm sorry," I said. "I really tried." She shook her head and looked up at me, eyes red and shining. "This isn't your fault." She swallowed hard. "Thank you for trying anyway." That hurt more than anything else she could have said. "I just didn't want you to get hurt," I replied. She let out a quiet, broken sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Too late." I moved closer and wrapped my arms around her, careful but firm. She froze for half a second, then leaned into me, clutching my jacket as the tears finally broke free. Her sobs were quiet, but they shook her whole body. I held her, one hand resting gently against her back. "You're not alone," I said softly. "No matter what he does, you're not alone." She didn't answer. She just cried, and I stayed there with her, wishing I had been strong enough to change the outcome. Wishing that I never learned what I did, that I never offered Edward to prove he had a soul. Kind of lost motivation to write this fanfic. Will keep doing it out of duty, but IDK, I'm not enjoying it as much anymore. 13 comments 0 vote. One last try. Friday, October 21, 2005. Mike. I arrived late at the Clearwater house. The porch light was already on, casting a warm yellow glow over the worn wooden steps. I shut off the engine and sat there for a second longer than necessary, listening to it tick as it cooled. Laughter drifted faintly from somewhere inside, mixed with the low murmur of a television. Baseball, if I had to guess. I climbed out, shut the door quietly, and let myself in. The familiar smell hit me right away. Wood smoke, fried onions, something savory simmering on the stove. The Clearwater house always smelled like food and people, like life was actually happening inside it. Harry Clearwater was stretched out on the couch, one arm draped over the backrest, a beer in his hand. The TV was on just loud enough to hear the announcer calling plays. He glanced over when I came in. "Well, look who finally decided to show up," he said, eyes never leaving the screen. "Sorry," I said, "ran late," he snorted. "You always do these days." I stepped further inside. "Hey, Harry." He lifted his beer in acknowledgement and took a long sip, clearly invested in whatever was happening on the field. From the kitchen came the sound of pots clanking and Sue's voice humming under her breath. I leaned against the doorway. "Hey, Sue." She turned, smiling immediately when she saw me. Her hands were dusted with flour, apron already smudged from use. "Mike," she said warmly. "You're just in time. Dinner's almost ready." "Smells great," I said, and I meant it. She nodded, then studied my face a little more closely, her smile softening. Sue had a way of doing that, of actually looking at people. "How's Bella doing?" she asked gently. I sighed before I could stop myself. That alone was answer enough. Sue's expression tightened with concern. She turned back to the stove, stirring slowly. "Still not great," I admitted. "She barely eats. Lost more weight again. Charlie doesn't know what to do anymore." Harry let out a grunt from the couch. HMPH. Before either Sue or I could say anything else, footsteps thudded down the stairs. Leah appeared, arms crossed, her expression already sharp. "It's been a month since the Cullens left," she said flatly. "She needs to stop acting like the world ended." I glanced at her. "Leah." "No," she said, cutting me off. "I'm serious. Everyone keeps tiptoeing around her like she's made of glass. That doesn't help." Harry raised his beer slightly. "Good riddance, if you ask me." He took another sip, eyes still glued to the game. Sue frowned. "Harry." "What?" he said. "I never liked them. Weird kids. Whole family gave me the creeps." Sue turned back to me, hesitation flickering across her face. "Mike," she said carefully, "I know she's your friend. And I know you're worried. But Leah might have a point." Leah's eyebrows lifted, surprised but pleased. Sue continued, "You can't spend all your free time with her just because she's heartbroken. If you keep hovering, she might never push herself to move on. Sometimes people need space to figure things out." The word stung, even though I knew she wasn't trying to be cruel. "I'm not hovering," I said, though it came out weaker than I intended. I don't want her to be alone." Leah scoffed. "She's always alone. That's kind of her thing." I shot her a look. "That's not fair." She shrugged. "It's not wrong either." Before I could respond, another door creaked open upstairs. Seth bounded down the steps two at a time, hair messy, t-shirt wrinkled, energy completely oblivious to the tension thick in the air. "What's for dinner?" he asked cheerfully. Sue let out a breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Roast chicken and potatoes." "Yes," Seth said, pumping a fist. Then he finally noticed me. "Oh hey, Mike, when did you get here?" "Couple minutes ago," I said. He grinned like nothing in the world was wrong. "Awesome, you staying for dinner?" "Yeah," I said, "if that's okay." "Always," Sue said immediately. Seth plopped down onto the arm of the couch near Harry, peering at the TV. "Who's winning?" Harry muttered something about bad calls and lousy umpires. Just like that, the atmosphere shifted. Not gone, but lighter. Trust Seth to bulldoze straight through emotional landmines without even realizing they were there. I leaned back against the wall, folding my arms. Sue went back to cooking. Harry focused on the game. Leah stalked off toward the kitchen, muttering under her breath. Seth started asking Harry questions about baseball that Harry pretended to be annoyed by but answered anyway. And me, I stood there, thinking about Bella. About the hollow look in her eyes lately. About how empty her house felt even when I was sitting right next to her. Maybe Sue was right, maybe Leah was right too, as much as I hated to admit it. But the idea of stepping back, of leaving Bella alone with all that pain, made my chest tighten. I wasn't sure what the right move was anymore. I just knew that whatever Edward had set in motion, it wasn't done ruining people yet. And somehow, I had a feeling it was going to get worse before it got better. The next morning, I woke up tangled in unfamiliar sheets that smelled like laundry soap and salt air. For half a second, I didn't know where I was. Then I felt the warmth beside me. Leah lay on her side, back to me, dark hair spilled across the pillow, one arm tucked beneath it. The early morning light filtered in through the window, pale and gray, painting soft lines across her shoulder and the curve of her back. She was still asleep, breathing slow and even, face relaxed in a way I didn't get to see very often. Careful not to wake her, I slid out of bed. The floor was cold under my feet. I shrugged it off and kept moving, gathering my clothes from where they had been dropped the night before. I shut the bathroom door quietly behind me and turned on the sink, splashing cold water on my face. The mirror showed me someone who looked more tired than he should have been. Dark circles under my eyes. Jaw tight with thoughts I hadn't shaken even in sleep. Bella, Edward, Forks, all of it. I brushed my teeth, washed my face properly this time, letting the water wake me up fully. When I was done, I returned to the bedroom and changed into clean clothes, pulling on my jacket and running a hand through my hair to make myself look at least somewhat presentable. When I was finished, Leah started stirring. She rolled onto her back, blinking slowly, then turned her head toward me. Her eyes narrowed slightly as they focused. "You're up early," she said, voice rough with sleep. "Couldn't stay asleep," I replied. She propped herself up on one elbow, sheets sliding down just enough that I politely looked anywhere but there, which in turn made her smirk and show even more skin. "Where are you going?" I hesitated, just long enough for her to notice. "Bella's," I said. Her expression shifted immediately. The sleepiness vanished, replaced by something sharper. "What did we talk about yesterday?" she asked. I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. I know. She waited, eyes narrowed, clearly unimpressed. "But I want to try one last thing," I continued. "Just once. I'm going to drag her out whether she wants it or not. Get her out of the house. Force her to do something different." Leah studied my face, searching for something. "And if that doesn't work?" she asked. I met her gaze. "Then I'll follow your approach. I'll give her space." She exhaled slowly and flopped back against the pillow, staring up at the ceiling. "Damn it," she muttered. For a moment, I thought she was going to argue. Instead, she rolled onto her side again and looked back at me. "All right," she said. "One last try." Relief loosened something in my chest. "But," she added, pointing a finger at me, "you come back for dinner." I smiled softly. "You know I'll always come back to you." Her eyes softened despite herself. Just for a second. Then she grabbed a pillow and hurled it at my head. "So corny," she said. I caught it easily, laughing, and walked back over to the bed. I set the pillow gently beside her and leaned down, pressing a quick kiss to her lips. "Wish me luck," I said. She snorted. "Yeah, I won't do that. You know luck has a personal vendetta against you." I chuckled. "Yeah, it really does." She smirked faintly and waved me off with a lazy flick of her hand. "Go, before I change my mind." I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, her presence lingering behind me like warmth I didn't want to leave. As I stepped outside into the cool morning, the air damp and heavy with mist, I took a deep breath. One last try, for Bella, and for my own peace of mind. Support with Power Stones or comments Turtle musical notes. 15 comments 0 vote. He Who Sparkles. Saturday, October 22, 2005. Charlie's cruiser was already idling when I pulled up, exhaust fogging the cool Forks morning. He had one foot out the door, thermos in hand, jacket half-zipped like he had dressed on autopilot. He glanced up when he saw me and his face eased into a tired smile. "Morning, Mike," he said. "Here to see Bella." "Yeah," I replied, shutting my car door. "That's the idea. I'm planning to drag her out of the house. See if I can finally get her out of her funk." Charlie huffed a breath that might have been a laugh on a better day. "Good luck with that, and hey, thanks for everything you're doing." He opened the cruiser door the rest of the way. "Now if you'll excuse me, I've gotta get to work." "Sure," I said, "don't let me stop you." He gave a short wave, slid into the driver's seat, and pulled away down the road, leaving behind the low rumble of the engine and the quiet that always clung to this place. I turned back to the house and knocked once, more out of habit than expectation. Nothing, not even the shuffle of footsteps. "Figures," I muttered. I tried the handle, unlocked. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The living room looked lived in, but in the wrong way. Takeout bags stacked near the trash can. Cardboard containers on the counter. The faint smell of old fries and soy sauce hung in the air. "Charlie's definitely been cooking," I murmured to myself. I closed the door behind me and headed upstairs, my steps familiar enough that I didn't have to think about where I was going. Her door was closed. I knocked lightly. "Bella." I waited. Nothing. I knocked again, a little louder. Still nothing. I could hear her though. And by the rhythm of her breathing I knew she was awake. Or at least not asleep. "All right," I said quietly. "We're doing this the hard way." I grabbed the handle and yanked the door open. Her room was dim, curtains pulled tight like she was trying to shut the world out. Bella was curled into herself under the covers, facing the wall, dark hair spilling over the pillow. She didn't move, but her breathing hitched just slightly. I walked over and grabbed the edge of the blanket. Rise and shine, Bella. I yanked the covers away in one clean pull. She yelped and lunged for them, fingers scrabbling uselessly at the air. Mike, give them back. Nope, I said, holding the blanket out of reach. You've been cocooning long enough. She squinted at me, eyes red-rimmed and unfocused, like she hadn't slept properly in weeks. Her voice cracked as she sat up, clutching the pillow to her chest. What are you doing here? She demanded, though it came out more tired than angry. Saving you from yourself, I replied. Or at least trying to. She glared at me for a second, then dropped her gaze to her lap. Her shoulders sagged. I'm not going anywhere. Yes, you are, I said, softer now. You don't even have to like it. She swallowed, blinking hard. Mike, I stepped closer, draped the blanket back over the bed instead of handing it to her. Get dressed. 5 minutes. If you don't, I'm opening the curtains, and neither of us wants that. She huffed a weak, humorless sound. You're an ass. Yeah, I agreed, but you're still getting out of this room. She hesitated, then nodded once, barely there. 5 minutes, she repeated. I turned toward the door, giving her what privacy I could. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard her sigh, long and shaky. It wasn't a victory, not even close, but it was a start. When Bella finally came out of her room, I had to stop myself from reacting too fast. She looked bad, not horror movie bad, not yet, but bad enough that it made something twist uncomfortably in my chest. Her clothes hung looser than they should have, like they belonged to someone else. Her skin looked dull, her eyes too big for her face, shadows clinging stubbornly beneath them. She wasn't a walking corpse, but she was clearly headed in that direction if someone didn't grab the wheel soon. I must have let something show, because she immediately rolled her eyes. What? She asked, defensive already. Where are you taking me? First of all, I said, folding my arms, you look like shit. Wow, she muttered. Good morning to you too. Second, I went on, ignoring that, remember that stupid clearing you're always rambling about. The one where he who must not be named took you. She froze just a little, then scowled. He's not Voldemort. Then why does his name make you wince every time someone says it? I shot back without missing a beat. Edward. Sure enough, she flinched. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but it was there. I pointed at her. See. Bella exhaled slowly and crossed her arms, shoulders hunching in on themselves. All right, she admitted, you might have a point. But he who must not be named is such a mouthful. Let's stick to you know who. Or just Voldemort. I snorted. Fair. Though I'm personally fond of Hugh Sparkles. She shot me a look, then, miracle of miracles, a small laugh slipped out. It was weak and rough around the edges, like it hadn't been used in a while, but it was real. I smiled before I could stop myself. There it is. See, your laugh still works. Don't get used to it, she said, though there was no real bite behind the words. She hesitated, then asked, do you even know where that clearing is? Nope, I said cheerfully. Not a clue. She blinked. Then why? Because we've got the whole day to find it, I cut in. But before that, we're getting some food into you, because you look like you definitely need it. She glanced down at her hands, fingers thin, knuckles a little too sharp. She flexed them slowly, like she was seeing them for the first time. Yeah, she said quietly. Maybe I do. I grabbed my jacket from the chair by the door and gestured for her to follow. Trust me, one step at a time. Today's step just happens to involve pancakes. Or burgers. Or anything with actual calories. She hesitated only a second before nodding and slipping her shoes on. It wasn't fixing everything, but again, it was a start. Support with power stones or comments turtle musical notes. 10 comments 0 vote. When the dream faded. Saturday, October 22, 2005. Mike. The diner was already half full when we walked in, the familiar smell of coffee, grease, and syrup hitting me like a wall. Forks didn't really wake up early, but the diner was the one place that never seemed empty. Truckers, locals, a couple of old guys arguing quietly over sports in the corner. Bella hesitated just inside the door, shoulders tight, like even this much movement was an effort. I didn't give her time to overthink it. I guided her to a table by the window and slid in across from her. The waitress came by almost immediately, coffee pot already in hand. "Morning," she said, pouring without asking. "What can I get you too?" I didn't even look at the menu. "2 mountains of pancakes," I said. "Like, the biggest stacks you've got. And 2 plates of eggs. Sunny side up, lots of bacon on the side. And some bread." Bella's head snapped toward me. She stared like I'd just ordered food for a small army. "There's no way I'm eating all that." I glanced at her, completely unfazed. "Don't worry about it, eat what you can, I'll handle the rest." She shook her head slowly, lips twitching despite herself. "You're a pig." I lifted my chin proudly and pressed a finger under my nose. "Oink oink." That did it, she snorted before she could stop herself, then quickly covered her mouth, like she was surprised the sound had come out of her at all. It wasn't loud, it wasn't carefree, but it was a laugh, which I would count as a win. The waitress raised an eyebrow at our order but just scribbled it down and moved on. I wrapped my hands around my coffee, letting the warmth seep into my fingers, watching Bella stare at the tabletop like she was bracing herself. When the food finally arrived, it was even more ridiculous than I'd imagined. Pancakes stacked so high they leaned slightly, plates crowded with eggs and bacon, bread shoved onto a separate dish like an afterthought. Bella stared at it in quiet horror. I, on the other hand, dug in. I cut into my eggs, shoveled bacon onto my plate, and immediately went to work on the pancakes. Bella picked up her fork and knife, poking cautiously at her stack like it might collapse on her if she wasn't careful. Which it did. Her pancake slid halfway off the plate, and she froze, staring at it like she'd just committed some kind of crime. I had to bite back a smile. She tried to cut a smaller piece, movements careful, almost fragile. Meanwhile, I grabbed the syrup and poured it generously over my pancakes. Then some more, probably an unhealthy amount. Bella watched in slow-motion horror as I folded one pancake over itself and shoved it into my mouth without cutting it at all. She stared at me like I was a wild animal. I swallowed and caught her look, raising an eyebrow. "You eating or not?" She blinked, then sighed. All right, she took a small bite, chewing slowly, like she wasn't sure her body remembered how to do this. I didn't rush her, I just kept eating, kept things normal, loud, unapologetic. After a few minutes, I took a sip of coffee and leaned back slightly. "Enjoy this outing," I said casually, "because after today, I'm handing full custody back to Charlie." She paused mid-chew and looked up at me. "What?" "I mean it," I went on. "From now on, I'll only see you in class and maybe every other weekend." "That's it." She swallowed hard and huffed. "I'm not your daughter, Mike." I took another sip of coffee, letting the words settle before answering. "Then you've gotta stop acting like it." Her eyes widened just a little. "This past month," I continued, calmer now, "I've spent most of my free time taking care of you. Making sure you eat. Making sure you don't shut yourself away completely. I know you're hurt, I get that, I've been trying to be understanding." I set the mug down. "But you're not getting better. So I'm trying something different." She looked down at her plate, shoulders slowly curling inward. "I'm giving you space," I said. "Real space. You heal on your own terms. You can still call me if it's an emergency. I'm not disappearing, but I can't keep hovering like this. It's not helping either of us." Her fingers tightened around her fork. "Sorry," she said quietly, "for being such a burden." That hit harder than I expected. I leaned forward immediately. "Hey, no, stop that." She flinched, then looked up. "You're not a burden, Bella," I said firmly. "Not even close. But being this dependent on someone else, that's not healthy. I don't want you living your life around who's keeping you afloat. I want you to make your own life." She stared at her plate for a long second. Then, for some reason, she chuckled. It was soft, almost disbelieving. "You're really starting to sound like you are my father," she said. I snorted. "Great, that means I'm officially old." She smiled faintly, shaking her head, and took another bite of pancake. This one was a little bigger than the last. I watched her eat, not saying anything else. Progress didn't have to be loud. Sometimes it was just a girl, a fork, and a pancake that stayed on the plate. And for now, that was enough. In the end, Bella barely made it through a tenth of what was on the table. To be fair, even that was impressive. For a normal human, it was a solid breakfast. For Bella, after weeks of barely eating, it was a minor miracle. I watched her slow down, fork hovering uncertainly over the plate before she finally set it down with a small sigh. "I'm full," she said, sounding more apologetic than satisfied. "That's fine," I said immediately. "You did good." She glanced at the food like it had personally betrayed her. "You're insane if you think you're finishing all that." I didn't answer. I just picked up my fork and kept going. Pancakes, eggs, bacon, bread. I cleaned plate after plate without pausing, barely slowing down, syrup disappearing, bacon vanishing in handfuls. A couple at the counter started openly staring. One guy near the window stopped mid-sip of coffee, eyes wide. Bella noticed too. She leaned back slightly, watching me with a mix of disbelief and concern. "You're not even breathing between bites." "I am," I said around a mouthful. "Just efficiently." By the time I leaned back, the table was a graveyard of empty plates. I didn't feel bloated. I barely felt half-full. Bella shook her head. "You're not human." "Last I checked." "You're right," I said. I paid the bill and left a generous tip. Something I probably would not have done a couple months ago. Turns out having money you did not have to worry about changed things. We stepped back into the cool air, the sky still heavy with clouds. I unlocked the car, and we drove out of town, past familiar roads, toward the stretch of forest near the Cullens' old place. I parked where the trees grew thicker, the road narrowing until it felt like the world was being swallowed by green. As we got out, I popped the trunk and grabbed a backpack. Bella eyed it. "What's that?" "Food and water," I said. "Just in case." I slung it over one shoulder and then paused, turning to her. "Do you know which way the clearing is?" She chewed her lip, eyes drifting to the trees like she was trying to see through them. Then she pointed to the right. "I think that way," she said. "I don't know how far though. Edward took me there on his back. He ran for a while." "Vampire while?" I asked. She grimaced. "Long." I handed her the backpack. "You carry this." She barely had time to protest before I crouched slightly in front of her. "Get on." She blinked. "What? I'll carry you," I said. "I might not be vampire fast in human form, but it'll still be faster than you walking all the way there." She hesitated. "Why don't you just shift into your wolf form?" I snorted. "Unless it's an emergency, only Leah is allowed to ride me like that." Bella froze. Her face heated instantly, pink blooming across her cheeks. "Oh," she said, clearly hearing it the same way I suddenly did. It took me a second. Then I laughed loud enough to echo between the trees. "Wow," I said, wiping at my eyes. "That sounded way worse than I meant." Bella huffed, still blushing. "You think?" "Get on," I said, still grinning. "Before it gets even more awkward." She climbed onto my back carefully, arms looping around my shoulders. She was light, too light. It made my jaw tighten, but I pushed the thought aside and started moving. Her directions were vague. Maybe more left. No, wait, I think it was straighter. Actually, we might have gone too far. We backtracked, then did it again. At one point, I stopped and turned in a slow circle. "Bella," I said, "be honest. Are you guessing?" She sighed against my shoulder. "A little." We laughed about it, but the hours stretched on. The forest thickened, thinned, then thickened again. We stopped to drink water, to eat cookies, to reorient ourselves. By the time the light shifted and I began feeling numb, nearly 5 hours had passed. Then suddenly, the trees opened. I stepped into the clearing and stopped. It was underwhelming. The grass was dull, the flowers wilted, their colors long gone. The air felt quiet, but not magical. Just empty. Bella slid off my back slowly and took a few steps forward. She turned in a slow circle, then let out a breath. "This is it," she said softly. "You're sure?" I asked. She nodded. "The trees are in the same place. I wouldn't mistake it." We sat down in the middle. I took the backpack from her and pulled out sandwiches, handing her one along with a bottle of water. I cracked open a Coke for myself. "Well," I said after a bite, "how do you feel?" She opened the water and took a long sip before answering. "I don't know," she admitted. "Before, I felt like I needed to see this place again. Like it was important. But now that I'm here, I just feel empty." She stared at the ground. "Everything with Edward feels so far away. Like it was all just a dream." I chewed, swallowed, then grabbed a second sandwich. "I get it," I said. "But you know what's weird about dreams?" She looked at me. "When you're in them, everything makes sense. It feels perfect. Then you wake up and think about it, and you start noticing all the inconsistencies. All the stuff that should have tipped you off." I shrugged. And suddenly you realize how stupid it was. Bella exhaled and picked up her sandwich. That's exactly how I feel, she said. Everything was too good to be true. She took a bite, slow and thoughtful, eyes unfocused as she stared at the wilted flowers. We stayed like that for a while, but the silence didn't feel heavy at all. It just felt real. We ate in silence for a few minutes, the forest settling around us. A breeze stirred the branches overhead, sending a few brittle leaves skittering across the clearing. Then Bella spoke again, quieter this time. Do you still keep in contact with the Cullens? I paused mid-chew. I swallowed, took a slow sip of my Coke, and stared at the trees for a second longer than necessary before answering. Yeah, I said softly. I still talk to Alice sometimes. And Emmett and I play online together every now and then. She glanced at me, waiting. It's not like before, I added. We don't say much. It's awkward. Bella nodded faintly, fingers tightening around her water bottle. Where are they? She asked. Alaska, I said. They're staying with their cousins. The Denali coven. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Is Edward there too? I sighed, leaning back on my hands and tipping my face toward the gray sky filtering through the trees. No, I said. He left on his own. She looked down. According to Alice, he only calls once a week, I continued. Esme's worried about him. Bella bit her lip, eyes distant. I see. The air felt heavier again. Familiar. Dangerous. I straightened abruptly. Hey. She looked up. We came out here so you could get over Edward, I said firmly. Not spiral back into thinking about him. So let's not talk about him anymore. She hesitated, then nodded. You're right, it's not healthy. She took another sip of water, then glanced at me sideways. So, how are things going with Leah? I relaxed a little. Good, really good. She smiled, a genuine one this time. Any talk about settling down? I had just taken a mouthful of soda when her words made me sputter, coughing as it went completely the wrong way. Cola burned its way up my nose, and I bent forward, hacking and wiping at my face with my sleeve. Bella stared at me for half a second. Then she burst out laughing. I wiped my nose again, groaning. Glad my suffering is so entertaining. She pressed a hand to her mouth, still giggling. Sorry, you just looked so shocked. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Settling down, huh? I stared at the canopy overhead, watching branches sway. Honestly, I haven't thought about it, I admitted. I mean, we're good. Great, even, but I haven't even graduated high school yet. It just slipped my mind. Bella tilted her head. Do you think Leah has thought about it? That did not help. My stomach dropped. Oh God, I muttered. What if she has? Bella raised an eyebrow. What if she's been waiting for me to say something and I've just been my usual oblivious self? I said, words starting to tumble out. What if she thinks I'm not serious? Or that I don't see a future with her? I sat up straighter. What if she gets mad? Or worse, bored? Bella chuckled. Mike, I mean, she could be thinking I'm dragging my feet in. Mike, breathe. I sucked in a sharp breath. Right, breathing. I should do that. I forced myself to inhale, then exhale. Slowly. That helped, I said, only half joking, even though my mind was already spiraling into imaginary proposal plans involving rings and speeches and catastrophic failure. Bella shook her head, smiling. You should talk to her about it. I frowned. Wouldn't that ruin the surprise of proposing? She rolled her eyes fondly. You wouldn't be proposing, you'd just be talking. Talking about what? About your future, she said. Together, casually. Ask what she wants, where she sees herself. You can save the big proposal for later. I considered that. Like, after graduation, I asked. Or even later than that, she said. Nobody's rushing you. Something loosened in my chest. Yeah, I said. You're right. Of course you're right. We stayed there for hours after that, talking about nothing and everything. School, movies, Seth's endless energy, Leah's temper, Charlie's cooking disasters. The forest shifted with the afternoon light, shadows stretching and changing, the clearing slowly cooling. Eventually, Bella stood. She took one last look around, eyes lingering on the trees, the grass, the faded remains of what must have once been beautiful. Like she was storing it away somewhere safe. Let's go back, she said. You sure? I asked, standing as well. She nodded. Yeah. She took a deep breath, shoulders squaring. It's time to start living again. Got some inspiration last night and couldn't sleep until I finished writing this chapter. Now I'm sleepy, yawning face. I know quite a few people don't like Bella, but I think she's an interesting character, and she's pretty easy to write. Support with power stones or comments. Turtle musical notes. 12 comments, 0 vote. The calm before the river. When I pulled into Leah's driveway, I already had that familiar feeling that something strange was about to greet me. The house looked normal enough from the outside. Lights on, curtains half drawn, the faint sound of the TV murmuring from inside. Still, the moment I stepped through the door, I walked straight into a scene that made me pause. Harry had just cracked open a beer, the hiss of carbonation barely fading, when Sue's hand shot out with impressive speed. She plucked the can right out of his grasp like a hawk snatching prey. Without missing a beat, she said, "Thanks," tilted her head back, and took a long, unapologetic sip. Harry stood there frozen, his arms still stretched forward, fingers curled as if the beer were still there. He blinked once, then again. The sight would have been funnier if it were not so painfully familiar. "Hey," he finally said, staring at his empty hand. "That was my beer." Sue turned to him slowly, one eyebrow lifting in a way that immediately told me he was already losing this battle. "What did the doctor say?" she asked, her tone calm but sharp enough to cut through steel. Harry crossed his arms, turned his head away, and did something I did not think a grown man was physically capable of doing so convincingly. He pouted. Sue sighed, clearly having gone through this argument more than once already. "No alcohol with your medication," she said, "and if you absolutely need to drink something, a single glass of red wine is acceptable." Harry scowled. "But I don't like wine," he muttered. "I just want a cold one." Sue took another sip of the confiscated beer and gave him a pointed look. "And I want my husband alive," she replied. "Thank you very much." I cleared my throat and made my presence known before this turned into a full domestic standoff. "Hey, Sue." "Hey, Harry," I said, stepping fully into the room. "She's right, you know." Sue's expression softened instantly when she saw me. She smiled, clearly pleased to have backup. "See," she said, "even Mike agrees with me." Harry groaned and slumped slightly in his chair. "Not you two," he complained. "Everyone's against me in this house." I shrugged and set my keys down, unable to stop a small grin. "We're not against you," I said. "We're just very invested in you sticking around long enough to keep complaining." Sue laughed quietly at that, and even Harry's scowl eased just a little, though he still shot a mournful glance at the beer can in Sue's hand like he was saying goodbye to a fallen friend. Home felt loud, warm, and oddly comforting in that moment. Exactly the kind of chaos I did not know I had missed until I walked into it. Sue set the empty beer can on the counter and turned to me, her expression shifting into something gentler. "So," she asked, "how's Bella doing?" Before I could answer, Harry chimed in from his chair. "Yeah," he added, leaning back with a sigh. "Poor Charlie's been worried sick. He hasn't even agreed to go fishing lately. That's how bad it is. Won't leave her alone for more than a few hours." I smiled at that, rubbing the back of my neck. "I think she's getting better," I said honestly. "Slowly, but for real this time." Harry raised an eyebrow, clearly interested, and Sue relaxed just a little, like the tension she had been carrying eased off her shoulders. "And speaking of fishing," I continued, an idea forming as I spoke, "why don't we go tomorrow? We can take Seth too. Call Billy. I can even convince Charlie to come along. He needs to get out of the house." Harry's eyes lit up immediately, the gloom evaporating like it had never been there. "Now that," he said, sitting up straighter, "sounds like a plan." At that exact moment, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Leah appeared, hair still a little messy, wearing one of my shirts like it belonged to her. She paused halfway down, clearly having caught the tail end of the conversation. "If you boys are going fishing," she said, "I can invite Bella over. I'll call Emily too. We can do a girls' day here." Sue's face brightened at the suggestion, and she nodded approvingly. "That's a wonderful idea," she said. "Bella shouldn't be alone all day." Harry uncrossed his arms fully, looking more excited than I had seen him all afternoon. "You know what?" he said, already reaching for the phone. "That sounds perfect. I'm calling Billy right now." He did not even wait for anyone to respond. He was already dialing, grinning like a kid who had just been told school was cancelled. Sue shook her head fondly, a soft smile tugging at her lips as she watched him. "Honestly," she murmured, "sometimes I forget I married an adult." I glanced at Leah, who met my eyes and smirked, and for the first time since everything with Bella had started, my heart felt light. Like things were finally, slowly, starting to move forward again. Sunday, October 23, 2005. The next morning came way too early. I slipped out of bed carefully, moving slow enough that the floorboards would not betray me. Leah barely stirred, just shifted and mumbled something under her breath before burying her face deeper into the pillow. I paused for a second to watch her breathe, then quietly grabbed my jacket and stepped into the hall. Seth's door was closed. I did not bother knocking. I opened it and found him dead asleep, sprawled sideways on the bed like gravity had personally given up on him. One leg hung off the mattress, foot twitching every few seconds. Perfect. I grabbed his ankle and yanked. He slid off the bed with a surprised yelp and hit the floor flat on his back. The thud echoed through the room. Seth's eyes flew open, wide and panicked, his hands already scrambling for something that was not there. He froze when he saw me standing over him. "Hey, Mike," he said cautiously. "What's up?" "Get ready," I replied. "We're leaving in 20. He blinked a few times, rubbed his eyes, and nodded. "All right." Then he rolled onto his side and went right back to sleep. Right on the floor. I stared at him for a full 3 seconds. Seriously. I grabbed him by the shoulders and started shaking him. All right, you win," he shouted, flailing. "Stop it already." I let go, and he scrambled to his feet, hair sticking out in every direction. "Make it fast," I said, "or I'm dragging you to the car like that." He groaned but shuffled toward the bathroom, and I left him to it, shaking my head as I went to finish getting ready. When we went downstairs, Harry was already in the living room, wide awake, dressed, and surrounded by fishing gear like he had been waiting there all night. Rods leaned against the wall, tackle boxes were lined up neatly, and a cooler sat by the door. "Morning," I said. "Looks like someone's eager." Harry grinned. "You're damn right I am. I haven't gone fishing with the boys in over a month." Sue peeked in from the kitchen, coffee mug in hand, and pointed a finger at him. "And remember what I said?" "I remember," Harry replied, rolling his eyes. "No beer, just fish." She smiled anyway. We grabbed the equipment and hauled it outside, loading everything into the back of my Mountaineer. One of the benefits of driving something big was that it could handle half a small town plus fishing gear without complaint. Our first stop was Billy Black's place. He was already waiting outside when we pulled up, sitting in his wheelchair with a fishing rod resting across his lap. Jacob stood behind him, arms crossed, looking half amused and half resigned. Seth leaned out the window immediately. "Hey, Jake." Jacob shook his head with a smile. "Morning, Seth." I got out of the car and greeted them, then helped Billy into the backseat. Jacob folded the wheelchair and loaded it along with Billy's gear. "Appreciate it," Billy said as he settled in. "Anytime," I replied. Then we were off again, heading toward Charlie's place. When we pulled up, he was already standing on the porch with his fishing gear in hand, jacket zipped up, looking more awake than I had seen him in weeks. I parked and waved. "Hey, Charlie, toss your stuff in the back and hop in." He did exactly that, climbing into the seat next to Billy and greeting everyone with nods and quiet hellos. There was something lighter about him, like the constant tension had eased just a bit. As we drove, conversation slowly picked up. Seth talked non-stop, Jacob occasionally chimed in, Harry and Billy argued good-naturedly about which spot along the river was best, and Charlie mostly listened, but he smiled more than once. By the time we reached the Soul Duck River, the sun was just beginning to burn through the morning mist. The water moved steadily, glinting through the trees, and the air smelled clean and sharp. 10 comments 0 vote, learning to stay afloat, Mike. The river looked calm. That should have been my first warning. The Soul Duck flowed wide and steady, water sliding over rocks with a deceptively gentle sound, like it was minding its own business. Mist clung low to the surface, the kind that soaked your jeans if you stood too close for too long. The sun was just high enough to throw weak light through the trees, turning the water into moving glass. We spread out along the bank, rods in hand, lines cutting quiet arcs through the air. Harry and Billy claimed a spot further downstream, already deep into an argument about bait choice. Charlie stayed closer to shore, methodical and quiet, like fishing was less about catching something and more about remembering how to breathe. Jacob stood a little behind him, arms crossed, watching the water with that alert stillness he always had. And then there was Seth. Seth, who had been vibrating with excitement since we parked. "Okay," he said for maybe the 10th time, "but what if I catch something huge?" I didn't even look at him. "Then don't let it pull you in." He laughed like that was ridiculous. I'm not that weak. I glanced over just in time to see his line jerk hard. Not a nibble, not a tug, it was a violent, sudden yank that nearly ripped the rod out of his hands. Oh, oh, Seth yelped, feet scrambling for traction as the rod bent sharply. Mike, I got one. The water exploded. A massive salmon broke the surface in a flash of silver, twisting violently before slamming back down. Seth let out a startled shout, digging his heels into the muddy bank. Don't yank, I shouted. Let it run. I am letting it run. He yelled back, voice already tipping toward panic. The fish surged again, but Seth did not. Instead, the river won. His foot slipped, boots skidding uselessly over wet rock, and in the next second his balance vanished entirely. The rod went tight, his arms flew wide, but he didn't let the rod go even as he disappeared with a splash loud enough to make everyone turn at once. Seth, Jacob shouted. I was already moving. I dropped my rod and launched forward, hitting the water hard. The cold slammed into me like a punch. I was so thankful for my higher temperature right now. The current was stronger than it looked, tugging at my legs immediately, trying to pull me downstream. Seth surfaced a few feet away, coughing and sputtering, still clinging to the rod like his life depended on it. I still have it, he yelled, somehow proud. Let go of the damn fish. I shouted back, swimming toward him. No, of course not. Another surge from the line dragged him sideways, water rushing up over his chest. I grabbed the back of his jacket just as he went under again and hauled him upright. You're insane, I growled, planting my feet against the riverbed. You know that, right? But it's huge, he said, eyes wide, soaked hair plastered to his forehead. The salmon chose that moment to leap again, line slicing through the air, body thrashing violently before crashing back into the river. The force nearly tore the rod free. Seth yelled something incoherent. I swore. Then I wrapped one arm around him, anchoring him against my side, and reached out with the other hand to grab the rod above his grip. All right, I said through clenched teeth. You want it, then we do this together. The river fought us every step of the way. The current shoved against my legs, water pounding into my thighs as I dug in. The fish pulled hard, powerful and relentless, every movement deliberate and strong. To be honest, I could have easily ended this, but I didn't want to take it away from Seth. Real when I say, I told him. Not before. Okay, he said, breathless. The salmon surged. Now, he reeled. The rod flexed dangerously, but the line held. The fish twisted, thrashed, tried to bolt again, but we leaned into it together, weight and strength forcing it closer to shore inch by inch. The shouting from the bank blurred into background noise. All that mattered was the pull, the resistance, the steady give and take. Finally, the fish got tired. I felt it before I saw it, the strength fading just enough to matter. I hauled us toward the shallows, boots scraping rock, water dropping from waist deep to knee deep to ankle deep. Jacob was there instantly, net in hand. Now, I barked. The net plunged. The salmon thrashed once, twice, then went still. For a second, nobody spoke. Then Seth looked down at the massive silver body flopping weakly in the net. We did it, he said, stunned. I laughed, completely soaked, water dripping from my hair and jacket. Yeah, I said, you almost died, but sure. Totally worth it. The bank erupted. Harry whooped loud enough to echo off the trees. Billy laughed, clapping his hands together. Even Charlie shook his head, smiling despite himself. Seth threw his arms up in victory, rod still in one hand. Did you see that? I dragged a hand down my face, cold finally sinking into my bones. Next time, I said, when I tell you not to get pulled in. I'll try to get pulled in less, he finished, grinning. I snorted. The river flowed on like nothing had happened, calm and indifferent as ever. But as I stood there dripping, heart still racing, I realized how happy I felt right now. And maybe that meant we were finally doing something right. Bella, I had not realized how long it had been since I had been nervous about something so normal. Not vampires, not abandonment, not the constant weight in my chest that came and went without warning. Just, people. Leah's house smelled like coffee and something warm and sweet baking in the oven. The kind of smell that made you feel like sitting down before you even knew where the chairs were. Sue met me at the door with an easy smile, like she had known me much longer than 5 seconds. Bella, right? She asked, already pulling me into a gentle hug before I could answer. Yes, I said, startled, then quickly added, hi. She laughed softly and stepped back. "You're welcome here," she said, like it was the simplest thing in the world. That alone made my throat tighten. Leah hovered nearby, arms crossed, watching me like she was assessing structural damage. "She's not going to break," she told Sue. "I promise." "I know," Sue said, amused. "But I still worry." Emily arrived not long after. I noticed her immediately, not because of the scars, not at first, but because of how the room seemed to adjust around her. Like she carried warmth with her, the same way sunlight filled a space without asking permission. She smiled when she saw me, wide and sincere. "You must be Bella." I nodded, suddenly very aware of my hands. "Yeah, hi." She stepped closer, and that was when I saw them clearly. The scars. They traced across the right side of her face and down her arm, pale and uneven against her skin. I tried not to stare. I really did. I focused on her eyes, her smile, the way she tilted her head slightly like she was used to people hesitating around her. But she noticed anyway. "It's okay," she said gently. "You can look." I froze. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "It's fine," she repeated, still smiling. "Most people do." The room went quiet in that way that made my chest tighten. I swallowed and nodded, forcing myself to breathe. "What happened?" I asked quietly, unsure if I should have. Emily didn't hesitate. "A bear." Sue snorted softly from the kitchen. "She says it like she tripped on the sidewalk." Emily shrugged. "It was big." She glanced at me, eyes thoughtful, then added casually, "They look awful, don't they?" My mouth opened, closed. Panic flared briefly as I searched for the least wrong answer in existence. "No," I said finally, voice steadier than I felt. "There, proof that you survived." Emily blinked. Then her smile softened. "I like that answer," she said. Leah nodded once from the couch. "Told you she's not an idiot." Sue brought out mugs of tea and set them down, shooing us all toward the table. "Sit," she ordered. "You can't bond properly standing around like nervous deer." That earned a laugh from Emily and a small smile from me. We talked about nothing important at first. School, Forks, how small the town felt when you had lived there long enough. Sue asked me about Charlie, and I told her he had been hovering more than usual, which made her nod knowingly. "He does that," she said. "Men like him love quietly." Leah rolled her eyes. "That's one way to put it." Emily asked about books. I admitted I liked old ones, the kind that smelled like dust and ink. That somehow turned into a conversation about favorite places to read, which turned into Sue confessing she had once read half a romance novel in a grocery store because she could not wait until she got home. "That explains a lot," Leah muttered. I laughed before I could stop myself. It surprised me. The sound felt strange, like using a muscle I had forgotten existed. Everyone noticed, but no one pointed it out. They just let it happen. At one point, Emily leaned back and looked at me carefully. "You've been through a lot," she said, not asking. I nodded. "Yeah." She didn't push, just nodded back, like that was enough. And even after those words made me remember Edward, I did not feel like I was about to break. I felt held, not physically, something quieter, like being in a room where no one expected anything from me except honesty. It was honestly wonderful. 14 comments 0 vote, echoes on the riverbank. Mike. After the chaos with Seth and the salmon, we ended up building a small fire near the riverbank to dry our clothes. It was nothing fancy, just some gathered branches and a stubborn flame Harry insisted on tending like it was a newborn. The smell of smoke mixed with wet fabric and river water, sharp but oddly comforting. My jeans were still damp around the cuffs, but at least they were no longer so uncomfortable. Once we were reasonably dry, I went back to fishing. Seth, energized like nothing had happened, wandered off to bother his dad and Billy, loudly recounting his heroic battle with the fish. I could hear him exaggerating from where I stood, adding at least another meter to the salmon's length. I focused on the river, letting the steady rush of water calm my thoughts. The line dipped and swayed, sunlight glinting off the surface. For a few peaceful minutes, it was just me and the river. Then someone cleared their throat beside me. I glanced over to see Jacob standing there, hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He stared at the water like it had personally offended him. "Hey, Mike," he said after a second. "That fish was enormous, wasn't it?" I nodded, keeping my eyes on the line. "Yeah, it really was. Did you see how it had Seth flailing in the water?" Jacob snorted, the tension breaking just a little. "Yeah." His panicked face was priceless. I thought he was going to scream like a girl. He did scream, I said. Just underwater. Jacob laughed quietly, then fell silent again. The kind of silence that felt loaded. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. After a few seconds, he lowered his voice. Hey, about Bella. I stiffened without meaning to and looked at him. What about her? He hesitated, rubbing the back of his head. Do you have something going on with her? I blinked. Once. Then twice. What? No. There's nothing going on with Bella. What gave you that idea? Jacob avoided my eyes. It's just, whenever I ask Charlie about her, he always tells me she's with you. So I thought maybe. I sighed, the tension leaving my shoulders. Don't worry, there's really nothing going on. We're just friends, and I have Leah. That part felt important to say, even if everyone already knew it. I adjusted my grip on the rod, then added, Bella hasn't been doing well since the breakup with her boyfriend. She's needed company, that's all. Jacob nodded slowly, still not looking convinced. I turned to face him fully. You like her, right? He froze like I had caught him doing something illegal. His mouth opened, ready to deny it, but after a moment he just sighed. Yeah, he admitted quietly. I do. I've liked her since forever. I studied him for a second. The way his ears turned red, the way he stared at the ground like it might swallow him whole. Poor kid, he was completely smitten. I softened my tone. Maybe you should try spending time with her. His head snapped up, hope flashing in his eyes, only for it to dim when I continued. Nothing romantic, mind you, I said quickly. I don't think she has the headspace for that right now. But just hanging out would do her good. Another friend, someone else to talk to. I can't be with her all the time, you know. Jacob's shoulders slumped at the words no romance, but then he seemed to think about it. His expression shifted, the disappointment slowly replaced by something brighter. Just spending time, he asked. I nodded. Yeah, take it slow, let her set the pace. A small smile crept onto his face. I can do that. We stood there in silence for a moment, the river filling the space between us. Jacob looked calmer now, like he had been holding his breath and finally let it out. Thanks, Mike, he said. I shrugged. Just don't mess it up. He chuckled softly. I'll try. As he walked back toward the others, I turned my attention back to the water. The line bobbed gently, the current steady and patient. Some things, I thought, were worth waiting for. The rest of the day passed in that rare, comfortable way that made you forget time was moving at all. We ate the food Sue had packed for us, thick sandwiches and snacks that somehow tasted better outdoors, and kept fishing while the river caught the last of the sunlight. The air cooled as the afternoon slipped into evening, the sky turning orange and pink above the trees. Even Charlie looked more relaxed than he had in weeks, laughing quietly at something Billy said while Seth tried, and failed, to fish without splashing. His newly gained confidence after catching such a big fish had ended up playing against him. Eventually the sun dipped low enough that the water turned dark and reflective, and Harry finally declared it was time to head back. No one argued. We packed up the gear, stamped out the remains of the fire, and loaded everything into my car. The ride back to Forks was calm, the kind of quiet filled with tired contentment instead of awkwardness. Seth nodded off almost immediately, his head knocking lightly against the window every time the road curved. When we pulled up in front of Charlie's house, something felt wrong before I could even place it. As soon as I rolled down the window, the scent hit me. Sickeningly sweet. Wrong. It drifted from Bella's open window, faint but unmistakable once you knew what you were smelling. My stomach tightened. I kept my face neutral and turned my head back before anyone else noticed anything. Charlie was still in the backseat, gathering his things. Hey, Charlie, I said casually. Why don't you come with us and have dinner all together? Harry's head snapped up immediately. Yeah, he said, suddenly energized. I'm gonna make my famous fish fry. Come on, Charlie, it'll be fun. Charlie hesitated, his hand resting on the door. He glanced toward the house, worry flickering across his face. For a second I thought he might refuse. Then he sighed and gave a small, tired smile. All right, you convinced me. Bella should still be there anyway. At that, Jacob straightened in his seat, his eyes lighting up just a bit. He tried to hide it, but I saw it. Of course I did. I turned the car back on and started toward La Push. As the trees blurred past, my thoughts kept circling back to that scent. Someone had been in Bella's room. Someone who absolutely should not have been there. This made me think of Victoria. My grip tightened on the steering wheel. In the original story, it had been Riley. He had snuck into Bella's room to steal something with her scent so he could share it with the newborn army. The memory made my skin crawl. If that was happening again, then things were already moving faster than they should have. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Charlie was talking quietly with Billy, unaware of any danger. Seth had woken up and was animatedly describing the fish again, using his hands like he was reenacting a battle. Jacob listened with half his attention, the other half clearly somewhere else. Bella. By the time we reached La Push, I had made up my mind. I needed answers. I should give Alice a call to ask if she could see anything, even fragments would help. I didn't like being in the dark when Bella's safety was involved. As I parked the car, I promised myself one thing. Whoever that was, I was going to catch them. Don't forget to support with power stones or comments. Turtle musical notes. 17 comments 0 vote. The Hunter and the Prey. By the time we reached the Clearwaters house, the sky had begun to dim into soft evening colors, the kind that made everything feel slower and heavier. We parked along the side of the house and immediately started unloading the car. Coolers came out first. They were heavy, full with the day's catch. Harry nearly rubbed his hands together when he saw them. That, he said proudly, is what I call a successful day. The lids popped open, revealing rows of fish packed in ice. The smell hit instantly, sharp and fresh, cutting through the salty ocean air that always clung to La Push. The front door opened before we even made it up the steps. Sue was the first one out, towel slung over her shoulder. Emily followed close behind her, smiling warmly, and Bella stood just inside the doorway, a little quieter but looking better than she had in weeks. That alone eased something tight in my chest. Then Seth came barreling forward. "Did you see it?" he announced loudly, dragging his cooler open. "Because I'm just saying, I might officially be the best fisherman here." Leah snorted. "Best fisherman?" She leaned over, peering inside. Her eyebrows shot up just a little when she saw the size of the salmon. "Let me guess. It dragged you into the river and someone had to save you." Jacob laughed outright. "Yeah, Mike had to jump in before the fish drowned him." Seth's face turned red instantly. "That is not what happened." I crossed my arms. "That is exactly what happened." He sputtered. "It was a mutant fish," he said defensively. "With super strength. That did it." Emily laughed. Bella covered her mouth to hide a smile, and even Sue shook her head, amused. Harry clapped Seth on the shoulder like this was all part of the plan. "A win is a win," Harry said. "You'll tell that story for years." As everyone started moving inside, setting fish aside and talking about oil, seasoning, and how long things should fry, I felt the weight settle back in my chest. The laughter faded into background noise as I thought of what I'd smelled earlier. I cleared my throat. "I'm gonna take a walk," I said casually. "Clear my head a bit." Leah looked up from the counter with narrowed eyes. I gave her a look and that was all it took for her to understand me. She followed me outside without saying a word. Once we were far enough from the house that no one could hear us, she crossed her arms and tilted her head. "All right," she said. "What's going on? You've got that look in your eye like you're planning a murder." I sighed. "Of course you'd notice." "Please," she said dryly. "I live with you." I lowered my voice. I caught a vampire's scent at Charlie's house. It was coming from Bella's window. Her expression changed instantly. "That's not good," she said quietly. "No," I agreed. "I'm going to call Alice, see if she's seen anything. Then I'm going to check it." Leah nodded once. "All right, try to be fast. I'd go with you, but I'd just slow you down." I stepped closer and kissed her, quick but lingering enough to say everything else. "Let me make the call first." I pulled my phone out and dialed. Alice answered almost immediately. "Mike," she said, already tense. "What's wrong?" "There was a vampire in Bella's room," I said. "Recently. Have you seen anything?" There was a short pause. "No," she said finally, worry threading her voice. "Nothing. That means it's not someone we know." That made my stomach sink. "I'll try to keep watching," she added, frustrated. "But you know how it is. With you wolves involved, my visions get blurry. I can barely see anything at all." "I figured," I said. "I'll keep you updated. I'm going to try tracking the scent." "Be careful," she said softly. "I will." When I hung up, Leah was watching me closely. "She didn't see anything," I said. Leah exhaled slowly. "That makes it worse." "Yeah." I stepped back and started stripping out of my clothes. Shoes first. Jacket. Shirt. Leah didn't look away. In fact, she bit her lip. I felt heat rush to my face, but I didn't stop and I didn't tell her to turn around. This wasn't the time, and somehow I liked that she was watching with that look. Take care of my clothes, I said quietly. Always do, she replied. The shift tore through me like lightning. Bones snapping, skin stretching, heat flooding my veins until the world reshaped itself. The smells sharpened, the sounds deepened. I looked at her once more. She met my gaze without flinching. Then I turned and ran. The forest blurred around me as I accelerated, paws pounding earth, weaving effortlessly through trees and roots. Branches whipped past, rocks vanished beneath me, my body moving faster than thought. Easily over 200 miles per hour. The memory of the scent burned in my mind as I headed straight for Forks. Whoever had been in Bella's room, I was going to find them. And this time, they were not getting away. I covered the distance in less than 5 minutes. The forest blurred into streaks of green and shadow as I ran, paws tearing across earth and roots, leaping fallen logs without breaking stride. The closer I got to Forks, the more my focus narrowed, every sense sharpening until the world felt painfully clear. I slowed only when the trees thinned. Carefully, I circled the area, listening, sniffing, making sure there were no humans nearby. No cars, no voices, no movement except the distant hum of town life. Satisfied, I stepped out of the trees and crept closer to Charlie's house. The scent hit me instantly. Sweet, rotten, wrong. I took a deep breath, drawing it in fully, letting it settle in my lungs and mind. It was recent, too recent. No more than an hour old. My stomach dropped. Images flashed through my head before I could stop them. Bella in her room, Charlie downstairs, unaware and defenseless. What if we had not gone fishing? What if Charlie had been home? What if Bella had been there when the vampire arrived? My vision narrowed, wolf eyes sharpening with fury. I lowered my head and followed the trail, tracking it cleanly as it wound through town. The scent led me straight out of Forks and toward Port Angeles. I followed until the smells of the city overwhelmed it. Cars, oil, humans everywhere. I stopped abruptly, claws digging into the dirt as frustration burned through me. I snarled silently, pacing in a tight circle. No, I was not stopping here. I slipped deeper into the trees, far enough that no one could see me, and focused inward. Spirit walking. I let go. The sensation was immediate and disorienting, like being pulled upward by the spine. The forest dropped away beneath me as my spirit separated from my body. Then I froze. My wolf body was still standing. Not collapsed, not empty. It was awake. It turned its massive head and looked straight at me, tongue lolling out, tail wagging slowly like a giant, overgrown puppy. What the hell? How is this possible? I had never spirit walked while in wolf form before. I had assumed my body would simply fall still like it always did. Apparently not. I hovered there, staring at myself. The wolf tilted its head to the left, ears twitching. You can see me. Can you hear me? I thought. The ears perked. Be a good boy and wait here, I told it, feeling ridiculous even in my own mind. The wolf leaned its head again, considering, then gave a slow, deliberate nod before lowering itself to the ground and lying on its belly. I stared for a second longer. No time to process this now. I turned away and shot upward, flying high over the forest and toward the city. From above, Port Angeles spread out like a living thing, lights flickering, movement constant. 5 minutes later, I found him. A black-haired man crouched in an alley, hunched over a body sprawled against a wall. A homeless man, already dead, blood staining the concrete beneath him. Got you. The vampire straightened slowly, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. His eyes glowed faintly, alert and feral. It was lucky. If he had not stopped to feed, he could have been miles away by now. I followed him from above, careful to stay out of sight. He moved quickly, weaving through the city with purpose, already heading toward an exit. I wanted to strike. I could have smote him with lightning right then and there. But I needed answers. I watched until I knew exactly which direction he was leaving the city from, then turned back, diving toward the forest where I had left my body. My wolf was still there, tail wagging harder now as it noticed me returning. I could not help myself. Who's a good boy? I thought, crouching slightly. Yes, you are. The wolf practically vibrated with excitement. I re-entered my body in a rush of sensation. Heat, weight, instinct, and something else. Clarity. I realized then that the wolf was not just a shape I took. It was part of me, a separate instinctive self that could exist independently when I left my body. That realization hit hard. But there was no time to think about it right now. I circled Port Angeles from the forest, cutting ahead to where I knew the vampire would emerge. I hid as best I could, pressing my massive body into shadows and brush, controlling my breathing. I had to wait for less than 2 minutes for the vampire to arrive. Then he slowed abruptly, head snapping up, nostrils flaring. Damn it, he smelled me. The vampire turned to run and I exploded out of hiding. The distance vanished beneath me. I caught him almost instantly, jaws snapping shut around his leg. Bone shattered with a wet crunch as I ripped it free. He screamed in pain. No, please, no, I didn't want to do it, please stop, I was just following orders. He hit the ground hard, scrambling uselessly. I moved closer and saw his face clearly. He was just a boy, no older than 15. That made me hesitate for a moment. Then he tried to crawl away. I shook my head and lunged, tearing off an arm this time. He screamed again, begging, sobbing. Enough. I shifted back into human form without caring who might see me. What were you doing in Forks? I demanded. Who sent you? Was it Victoria? He shook violently. I don't know any Victoria. Riley told me to go there and kill the girl. I swear I didn't kill anyone. There wasn't anyone there, so I took something with her scent and left. I stepped closer, voice low and dangerous. Don't move. I searched his pockets and pulled out a piece of fabric. I lifted it to my nose. Bella. Then I noticed the way he was staring. What? I asked sharply. His eyes flicked to the fabric. I looked down. Underwear. Bella's underwear. My face burned instantly. Wait. I snapped, flustered. I didn't know it was underwear. I'm not a pervert. He blinked, confused. Why did you take this? I demanded. He looked away. I thought it was funny. Everyone back at the base has to sniff it to get the scent. I closed my eyes for half a second, but a word caught my attention. What base? Seattle, he said quickly. An old warehouse on the east outskirts. What else? There's a guy named Riley, he said. He's making an army. He told us someone wants to kill him. That they'd kill us all just for what we are. How many? I don't know. About 50 when I left. But most don't last long. They have very poor control and are always fighting each other. How do you kill each other? I asked. Do you burn the pieces? He frowned. Burn? No. You just destroy the head. When it's in too many pieces, they can't regenerate. That surprised me. Please, he said weakly. Will you let me go? I hesitated for a moment. He is just a boy. No, he's a vampire. The boy he was is already dead. I hardened my heart. No, I'm sorry, I said quietly. I can't. I shifted again. He tried to retreat, clawing uselessly at the ground. I brought my paw down and the head exploded in hundreds of pieces like a ball of glass. I closed my eyes as his pleas for mercy finally stopped. Afterward, I gathered dry branches and burned what was left. I could not leave it for humans to find. As I ran back toward La Push, the forest rushing past me, one sound would not leave my mind. The boys' screams, and no matter how fast I ran, they followed me all the way home. Temporary peace. By the time I made it back to the clearing where I had left my clothes, I had more or less managed to shove the screams into some dark corner of my mind. They were still there, echoing faintly, but quieter now, like a distant storm instead of thunder in my ears. Leah was exactly where I had left her. She sat on a tree stump near the edge of the clearing, my clothes folded neatly in her lap, her back straight and her posture alert despite how still she looked. She had been waiting for me to return. That alone made the weight in my chest ease, just a little. I slowed and shifted back, the familiar rush of heat and pressure rolling through me as fur receded and bones snapped back into place. The forest sharpened, then softened again as my human senses returned. I'm back, I said quietly. Leah looked up at me immediately. One glance at my face and her expression changed. She stood and crossed the short distance between us in 2 steps. You okay? She asked, eyes searching mine. Yeah, I said automatically. Then I hesitated. I mean, I'm fine. It's just. I trailed off, staring past her shoulder for a second, seeing things I did not want to see again. She did not rush me. The vampire, I said finally. He was young, 15, maybe. It didn't feel good killing him, even knowing he'd already killed people. My hands clenched at my sides. It doesn't feel right, I continued, my voice dropping. They're turning anyone they find. Kids. They don't care about the lives they're ending at all. To them they're just weapons for a stupid war they themselves started. The last words came out rough, almost a growl. Anger burned hot beneath the guilt, sharp and furious. Leah stepped closer and handed me my clothes. She helped me pull them on, her movements steady and familiar, grounding me. When I was dressed, she lifted her hands and cupped my face, forcing me to look at her. "You did the right thing," she said firmly. I swallowed. "By ending his life," she went on, "you saved every human he would have needed to feed on. You stopped something worse from happening." Her thumbs brushed lightly along my jaw. "You don't have to feel good about it. But you don't get to punish yourself for doing what had to be done." The tension in my shoulders finally broke. I lowered my head until our foreheads touched, breathing her in, forest and warmth and something solid and real. "You're right," I murmured. "Like always." She snorted softly. "Damn right I am." Then she leaned back, wrinkling her nose. "Now let's go inside so you can brush your teeth. Your mouth stinks of bleach." I let out a short laugh, surprised by it. No welcome back kiss. She started walking toward the house, tossing a glance over her shoulder. "Not until you stop smelling like death." I followed her through the trees, the lights of the Clearwater house glowing ahead of us. For the first time since Port Angeles, the screams stayed behind. As Leah and I opened the front door, the smell of fried fish hit me full in the face, hot oil and seasoning mixing into something so good it almost hurt. My stomach, traitorous and apparently done with trauma for the night, chose that exact moment to betray me by growling loudly. The sound echoed just enough to draw attention. Jacob looked up from the game controller, eyebrows lifting. "Was that a lion?" he asked seriously. Seth snorted, still mashing buttons. "Nah, sounded bigger." I groaned and rubbed the back of my neck, heat creeping into my face. Sue leaned out from the kitchen, spatula in hand, smiling knowingly. "Looks like someone's hungry," she said warmly. "Don't worry, dear, food's almost ready." "Thanks, Sue," I said, a little sheepish. "I'm just gonna change real quick before we eat." "Go on," she said. "You've earned it." I headed for the stairs, the sounds of oil popping and the low hum of conversation filling the house behind me. Halfway up, something caught my eye and made me pause. Bella was sitting on the couch next to Jacob, knees pulled up slightly, watching the game. She laughed quietly when Seth shouted something dramatic at the screen, her eyes bright, her posture relaxed in a way I had not seen in a long time. She looked normal, safe, alive. Something in my chest loosened at the sight, a tension I had not even realized I was still carrying finally easing. I looked at her for a second longer than necessary, making sure she really was there, that nothing was wrong. Bella glanced up and noticed me watching. She gave me a small smile. I nodded back once, then continued up the stairs, the weight of the night settling a little lighter on my shoulders as the sounds of laughter and sizzling food followed me upward. After a quick shower and an almost aggressive scrubbing of my teeth and tongue, I headed back downstairs just in time to see Sue and Emily carrying plates to the table. Steam rose from the food, the scent rich and comforting, wrapping around the room like a promise that for once, things were normal. "You're just in time," Leah said as she walked up to me. She rose on her toes and gave me a quick peck on the lips, casual and affectionate. The knot in my chest loosened another notch. "Perfect timing," I murmured back. Everyone began settling in, chairs scraping softly against the floor. The table filled quickly, though not quickly enough. With this many people, there were always a few casualties when it came to seating. Jacob, Seth, and Bella claimed spots on the couches, pulling the coffee table closer and balancing plates and napkins like it was second nature. Seth immediately started talking with his mouth half full until Leah shot him a look sharp enough to cut glass. "There is sauce on your chin," she said flatly. Seth wiped his face with the back of his hand. "Adds flavor." Jacob laughed, shaking his head, while Bella tried and failed to hide her smile behind her glass. There was still an empty chair at the main table. Bella could have taken it, but she stayed right where she was, leaning slightly toward Jacob as he pointed at something on Seth's plate and made a comment that made her laugh again. I noticed how close they seemed. A part of me wanted to say something. A harmless comment, a bit of teasing, just enough to make Jacob fluster and Bella roll her eyes. The thought amused me. But I chose to keep my mouth shut, for now. Dinner settled into an easy rhythm. Plates clinked softly, forks scraped, oil popped faintly in the kitchen as Sue finished up the last batch of fish. Conversation drifted from fishing stories to Seth exaggerating the size of his catch again, to Jacob complaining about losing at a game earlier and blaming Seth for cheating. Bella listened more than she spoke, but when she did, her voice was lighter than it had been in weeks. She looked comfortable, relaxed, like she belonged exactly where she was. I leaned back in my chair, letting the warmth of the room soak into me. The steady hum of voices, the occasional burst of laughter, the simple act of eating together all worked to push the darker thoughts to the edges of my mind. Just for tonight, I knew the problems were still there, waiting. Victoria, Riley, the vampire army growing somewhere not far from here. But for now, surrounded by the people I cared about, with good food and familiar voices filling the house, I allowed myself to breathe. Peace, even temporary, was something worth holding onto. 10 comments 0 vote. Preparing for the storm. The house was quiet by the time everyone finally left. The smell of fried fish still lingered in the air, mixing with pine and salt from the open windows, but the laughter had faded, leaving behind that strange hollow calm that always came after something good. Sue and Harry had gone to bed, Seth had already fallen asleep, and even Leah had gone to her room to give me space, sensing I needed it. I stood in the living room for a moment, staring at nothing. Then I walked outside and pulled my phone from my pocket. Alice answered on the second ring. "Mike," she said, "I was hoping you'd call." "I found him," I said without preamble. My voice sounded steady, even to my own ears. It was one of Victoria's newborns, although he didn't know her. He said he'd been changed by someone named Riley, who must be Victoria's decoy. There's a base on the east outskirts of Seattle. An old warehouse. About 50 of them, maybe more. Silence. "Alice," I asked, frowning. "Hello, are you there?" The line stayed open, but she didn't answer. My grip tightened on the phone. I could almost picture her now, frozen mid-step, eyes unfocused, caught in a vision she hadn't asked for. "Alice," I repeated, sharper this time. "Talk to me." Almost 30 seconds passed before she finally inhaled. "Mike," she said, and the way she said my name made my stomach sink. "They're already moving." I straightened instantly. "What?" Victoria felt the shift, she said quickly. She sensed the danger. She's not waiting anymore. She decided to attack early. Cold spread through my chest. "We're coming back to Forks," Alice continued. "All of us." "There's no need," I said automatically, even as my mind raced. "I can handle it. I'll ask the pack as well." "How many wolves do they have?" she asked immediately. I opened my mouth, then stopped. Images flashed through my head, each one landing heavier than the last. Sam, Jared, and Paul. Then there was Leah and me. That was it, only 5. My silence stretched just long enough to give me away. "Mike," Alice prompted gently. I exhaled through my nose. "Yeah, about that. The pack's still small, really small." There was a soft huff on the other end of the line. "I thought so." But she didn't sound smug, instead she sounded concerned. "I'll ask the Denali," she continued. "This is big enough that they won't ignore it." She paused mid-sentence. I held my breath. "Yes," she said suddenly. "They're coming." My stomach twisted tighter. "How bad is it?" Alice did not answer right away. "That newborn you killed," she said slowly. "He was right at the time. There were around 50. My heart pounded. "And now, there are almost 100, she said. I closed my eyes. Almost 100 newborns. They hadn't been idle. They had been accelerating, turning people faster, burning through humans like kindling. "How long?" I asked. "How long until they arrive?" Another pause. Shorter this time, but heavier. 5 hours, Alice said. "We'll be there in 2 so we can plan." I swallowed hard. My throat felt dry. "All right, I'll contact the pack. We'll hold until you arrive." "You're not alone in this," she said firmly. "Don't try to be." "I won't," I promised. The call ended, leaving me alone with the sound of the wind and trees. I lowered the phone slowly. 5 hours. That was all the time we had before a newborn army hit Forks. I ran a hand through my hair and turned toward the door, already shifting mentally into command mode. I had to tell Leah and call Sam. Whether we were ready or not, the war was coming early. I climbed the stairs slowly, every step heavier than the last. The house felt different now, like it was holding its breath. Laughter had drained out of the walls, leaving only creaking wood and the faint rush of the ocean in the distance. Leah's door was cracked open. The light inside was low and warm, spilling into the hallway. She was sitting on the bed, back against the headboard, hair still damp from her shower. The moment I stepped inside, she looked up. "What's wrong?" she asked. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a second, gathering myself. Then I sighed and ran a hand through my hair. "Victoria's coming," I said. "With an army." They'll reach Forks in about 5 hours. Leah's eyes widened. You're kidding me, she said. I shook my head. I wish. The surprise lasted only a heartbeat. Then her expression hardened, jaw setting, eyes sharpening into something focused and dangerous. All right, she said. What's the plan? I crossed the room and sat down on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on my knees. First, we call Sam, I said. He'll want to help, even if it's insane. The Cullens are on their way too, and they're bringing backup. Leah absorbed that silently, already thinking several steps ahead. How big an army are we talking about? She asked. Close to 100, I said. She let out a slow breath through her nose. That's a lot of newborns. Yeah, she reached for her phone without hesitation. I'll call Sam. Then she paused and looked at me. Are you going to tell Bella? I shook my head immediately. No, let her sleep. It's better if she doesn't know. Leah studied my face. They don't have her scent, I continued. And we're not letting them get anywhere near Forks. We'll stop them before they reach town. Silence settled between us for a moment. You should sleep too, I added. You don't need to get involved. She narrowed her eyes on me. Not a chance, she said flatly. I'm coming with you. I let out a quiet sigh, more tired than frustrated. Worth a try. She huffed. You know better than that. A faint smile tugged at my mouth despite everything. I did know. There was no world in which Leah Clearwater stayed behind while a fight like this was coming. She dialed Sam and he answered at the third ring. He sounded surprised that Leah was calling, but she didn't bother with pleasantries and immediately started to explain the situation. I watched her while she talked, the way her posture changed, the way command slipped naturally into her tone. When she hung up, she turned back to me. He's in, she said. All of them are. Jared and Paul too. They're heading out now. We'll meet at the Cullen house. Good, I said. Every second counts. She got off the bed and stood in front of me, resting her hands on my shoulders. We'll handle this, she said quietly. Together. I nodded, reaching up to lace my fingers with hers for a moment, grounding myself in the warmth and certainty of her presence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the trees faintly against the house. Support with power stones are comments turtle musical notes. 14 comments 0 vote. War Council. By the time Leah and I arrived at the Cullen house, the place looked abandoned. The tall, glassy structure loomed out of the trees like a dark monument, all lights off, windows reflecting nothing but forest and sky. No cars, no movement. The house was sealed tight, silent in a way that felt intentional, like it was holding its breath. Sam, Paul, and Jared were already waiting there. All three were standing, tense and alert, their eyes snapping to us the moment my car crunched to a stop on the gravel. I stepped out of the car, the cold air hitting my face. The forest felt wrong, too still, like it knew something bad was coming. I have to say, Sam started immediately, folding his arms over his chest. I don't like the idea of working with vampires. Leah shut the car door a little harder than necessary and walked up beside me. Then don't, she said flatly. No one's forcing you. Sam held her gaze for a moment, then exhaled slowly. If what you told me is true, he continued, looking back at me now, we're going to need all the help we can get if we want to survive this. Paul scoffed, arms crossed, his weight shifted back on his heels. And miss the fight, he said with a sharp grin. Not a chance. Jared nodded once, jaw set. He did not look excited. He looked ready. Sam turned fully toward me. None of us have ever killed a vampire, he said. So if you have advice, we'll listen. I didn't like being the one giving orders, but this was not the time for modesty. I nodded and stepped forward, planting my feet firmly in the damp earth. You might be slightly faster than vampires in a straight line, I said, keeping my voice steady, but don't let that fool you. They're more agile than you, and stronger. A lot stronger. Paul's grin faded just a little. Always work in pairs, I continued. You're three, so you move together. Cover each other's blind spots. Never assume one of you can handle one alone. Sam nodded, focused, absorbing everything. I would have suggested pairing one of you with Leah, I added, glancing at her briefly, but that won't work. Different packs. You wouldn't be able to communicate. Leah rolled her eyes but did not argue. Newborn vampires' advantage is that they're incredibly strong. Stronger than older ones in many cases. If one gets its hands on you, it won't hesitate. Bones break easily for them. Next to. The clearing went silent. They're inexperienced, though, I went on. Impulsive. They act on instinct and emotion. Most of them will attack head-on. That's your advantage. Let them overcommit. Make them sloppy. Paul clenched his fists, a low growl rumbling in his chest before he forced it down. When the Cullens arrive, I said, you stick close to them. Don't chase. Don't wander. Do not try to be a hero. If you get separated, you die. That landed hard. I'll try to keep everyone safe, I finished. But I won't lie to you. My priority will always be Leah. I turned toward her as I said it. She had her arms crossed now, eyebrow raised, clearly unimpressed. And don't give me that look, I added. I know you can take care of yourself. But this is an entire army we're talking about. She huffed quietly, shaking her head, but there was a small, unmistakable smile tugging at her lips. She hated being protected, but she liked knowing she mattered so much to me. Sam exhaled slowly. All right, he said. We stick together. We listen. And we don't do anything stupid. Paul clicked his tongue. Define stupid. Jared shot him a teasing look. You. Sam nodded. What he said. Paul smirked but nodded anyway. Fair enough. The forest shifted as a breeze passed through the trees, leaves whispering like a warning. I glanced toward the dark Cullen house again. Empty. For now. They'll be here soon, I said quietly. We killed time the only way people waiting for a war ever do. With pointless conversation and half-baked plans that kept looping back on themselves. Sam went over positioning again, tracing lines in the dirt with the toe of his boot while Jared listened quietly and nodded. Leah leaned against my car, arms crossed, eyes scanning the tree line every few seconds. Paul paced like a caged animal, muttering under his breath. Every 5 minutes or so, he made it everyone's problem. What's taking these leeches so long? Paul complained, kicking a pebble into the undergrowth. They know there's a deadline, right? I rolled my eyes. They're coming from Alaska, I said. The trip usually takes a full day. I honestly don't even know how they're planning to make it in time. As if summoned by sheer irritation alone, a familiar, light voice drifted from the trees. We have a plane. Alice stepped out of the shadows, her pixie-cut hair catching what little light filtered through the canopy. The air seemed to tense instantly. Sam, Paul, and Jared stiffened, muscles coiling, eyes locked on the tree line as the rest of the group emerged behind her. Pale figures moved with unnatural grace, their footsteps soundless, their presence pressing against my senses like a storm front. I felt Leah shift beside me, alert but steady. We left it in Port Angeles, Alice continued casually, as if she were explaining why she was late to dinner. Then we ran the rest of the way to save time. Of course they have a plane. Carlyle stepped forward, hands relaxed at his sides, his calm presence cutting through the tension like a blade through fog. Hello, Mike, he said warmly. Leah, Sam, Jared, Paul. I nodded, returning the gesture. Carlyle, it's been a while. It has, he agreed, then turned slightly. You already know my family. And these are our cousins from Denali. Tanya is their leader. A blonde vampire stepped forward, tall and striking, her golden hair falling perfectly over her shoulders. She smiled at me, slow and unmistakably flirtatious, and extended her hand. Before I could even react, Leah moved. She stepped directly in front of me and took Tanya's hand instead, her grip firm, her smile tight but polite. Leah, she said flatly. I bit back a grin. Tanya blinked once, then laughed softly, clearly unbothered. Ah, hello Leah, she said, eyes flicking briefly toward me before returning to her. You're cute too. She winked. Leah immediately took a step back, as if physically recoiling from the word. I could not stop smiling. Tanya turned back to the group, unfazed. These are my sisters, Kate and Irina, she said, gesturing to two women who stood slightly behind her, one with sharp, watchful eyes and the other quieter, almost wary. And Eliezer, she added, nodding toward a broad-shouldered man with an assessing gaze, and his wife, Carmen. They inclined their heads politely. That was when Paul decided the universe had been quiet for far too long. He nudged Jared with his elbow and said loudly, you know what? I would have totally asked her out if she didn't smell like death. Every single head snapped toward him. Tanya's smile vanished in an instant, her eyes narrowing dangerously. You don't exactly smell like roses either, she shot back coolly. Paul's face split into a grin. See, he said, pleased as hell. Totally wife material, such a shame. I braced myself for violence. Instead, Tanya stared at him for a long second, then laughed, a sharp, amused sound. Kate rolled her eyes. Irina looked horrified. Carmen hid a smile behind her hand. Emmett's booming laughter echoed through the trees. Sam pinched the bridge of his nose. Carlyle sighed, deeply and patiently, like a man who had seen this exact scenario play out far too many times. Leah muttered, "I can't believe we're trusting our lives to this." I leaned closer to her and whispered, "Hey, if nothing else, it's going to be memorable." She snorted despite herself. The tension eased, just a little, enough for everyone to breathe again. But beneath the awkward jokes and uneasy introductions, the truth lingered heavily in the air. An army was coming, and whether we liked each other or not, we were all standing on the same side now. Carlyle gestured toward the front door with an easy, composed motion. "Let's follow this conversation inside, shall we?" He moved ahead of us, unlocking the door and pushing it open. The Cullen house was dark and silent, the vast glass walls reflecting the forest-like black mirrors. The lights came on as we entered, footsteps echoing softly against polished floors as everyone filtered in. The tension followed us inside. It clung to the air, sharp and restless, like the house itself knew what was coming. No one wasted time settling in. Carlyle disappeared down the hall and returned moments later with a large, folded map. He spread it across the long dining table, weighing down the corners with his hands. Everyone crowded closer instinctively, wolves and vampires sharing the same space with only a thin layer of discipline holding instincts in check. Alice stepped forward, eyes already distant. "They'll pass through here," she said, placing a finger on the map. "They're planning to use the lake to mask their scent. Water will scatter it enough that they think we won't pick them up in time." Her finger slid northward, stopping at a narrow clearing between dense stretches of forest. "We intercept them here," she continued, "before they reach town." I leaned in, studying the terrain. Open enough to maneuver, but still boxed in by trees. Good. Newborns wouldn't think tactically. They'd charge. I straightened and stepped forward. "We should work in pairs." Several heads turned toward me. "Sam, Jared, and Paul will have to work together," I continued. "Because of the pack link. You move best as a unit." Sam nodded once, already on board. "You," I said, looking toward the Denali coven, "have an extra person. I suggest one of you works with Leah." Leah's head snapped toward me, brows lifting slightly. I turned to Tanya. "Can you do it?" Tanya smiled without hesitation. "Of course." Then she tilted her head, eyes flicking back to me. "And you?" "I'll fight alone." That got a reaction. Kate's eyebrows rose. Eliezer's gaze sharpened, openly assessing. Even Carlyle studied me more closely. "I'm the strongest one here," I said calmly. That earned me several raised eyebrows. Before anyone could comment, I added, "I'm not trying to sound conceited. You'll see later. I'm stronger and faster than vampires." Silence. I let it sit for a second before continuing. "I'll focus on providing cover. If anyone gets overwhelmed, trapped, or grabbed, I'll intervene. That will be my job." Leah opened her mouth. I looked at her. "And no," I said preemptively, "this is not up for debate." She scowled at me, but didn't argue. "Not yet. Carlyle, can you get some blood?" Carlyle inclined his head slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "You want human blood?" "Yes," I said, "if we can make the newborns lose control early, it'll break their coordination completely." Carlyle nodded. "That makes sense." I glanced around the room. "Does anyone here have concerns about maintaining control?" Jasper stepped forward immediately. "I do," he said honestly. "If we're using blood as bait, I'd rather feed now." I nodded. "All right, do it. I'll meet you at the clearing," Jasper said, already turning toward the door. Carlyle folded the map carefully. "I'll retrieve the blood bags," he said. "Once that's done, we'll head directly to the clearing." Everyone began moving at once, quiet but purposeful. Final preparations. No more jokes. No more small talk. Leah stepped closer to me as the room cleared, lowering her voice. "You better not get reckless." I met her eyes. "I won't." She searched my face for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good." Outside, the forest waited. Support with power stones or comments turtle musical notes penguin musical notes pig musical notes. 15 comments 0 vote. No room for mercy. By the time we reached the clearing near the lake, the forest had gone unnervingly quiet. The water lay still, dark and glassy, reflecting the moon like a broken mirror. Mist clung low to the ground, curling around roots and rocks, dampening sound. It was the kind of place where noise felt wrong, where even breathing too loudly seemed like an invitation. Perfect for an ambush. Carlyle and Emmett moved first, silent and efficient, unpacking the blood bags. The metallic scent was faint at first, carefully sealed, but even that was enough to make the air feel heavier, charged. One by one, we hung the bags from branches at different heights, spacing them throughout the clearing like macabre ornaments. The plan was simple. When the newborns arrived, we would rupture the bags. Human blood, fresh and overwhelming. They wouldn't be able to help themselves. Control would shatter, instincts would take over, and whatever coordination Victoria had managed to instill in them would dissolve into chaos. Berserk newborns were dangerous, but predictable. Easier to kill. Once the last bag was secured, everyone started moving into position. Pairs spread out across the clearing, each group keeping enough distance so no one would trip over another fight, but close enough that help could arrive fast if things went sideways. The Cullens and the Denali moved with practiced ease, their positions chosen instinctively, backs to trees, clear lines of sight, escape routes already calculated. The wolves disappeared into the forest. Sam, Jared, Paul, Leah, and I pulled back far enough to vanish into the undergrowth, our massive forms concealed by shadows and dense foliage. We'd hit hard and fast when the time came, right into the heart of the chaos. Surprise would be our biggest weapon. As I settled into place, muscles coiled and senses stretched thin, a thought slipped through my mind uninvited. Edward. For a brief, frustrating moment, I wished he were here. His mind reading would have made everything smoother, cleaner. Even in wolf form, he could have helped coordinate, bridge the communication gap between wolves and vampires. But Edward wasn't here, and we couldn't reach him. When I had asked earlier, Esme's expression had shifted instantly, worry shadowing her features. Alice had been the one to explain, her voice tight. He's gone back to his old habits, she'd said. Hunting criminals who slipped through the cracks. People who were never punished. Vigilante Edward. I'd snorted before I could stop myself. I see. So he's busy playing Batman. Emmett had laughed quietly at that, the sound rumbling deep in his chest, but Rosalie had elbowed him hard enough to make a point. It's not funny, she'd snapped. He's going to have a really hard time going back to the vegetarian diet when he stops. That had sobered everyone. Now, crouched in the dark with the lake breathing quietly beside us, I understood her concern better. Once you crossed certain lines, it was hard to step back. Blood changed things for vampires. It always did. I shook the thought away and refocused. This wasn't about Edward. This was about the army that was coming. The wind shifted slightly, brushing across the clearing and carrying scents with it. Pine, damp earth, and beneath it all, the faint, tantalizing promise of blood. I felt my jaw tighten. They'd smell it soon, very soon. I glanced toward Leah, her smaller wolf form tense beside me, eyes glowing faintly in the darkness. She met my gaze for half a second, steady and unflinching. Whatever was coming, we were ready. They came out of the lake like something dragged straight from a nightmare. Dark shapes broke the surface of the water in near silence, pale skin gleaming under the moonlight, soaked clothes clinging to them as they climbed onto the shore. One by one, then dozens at once. Red eyes burned in the darkness, feral and unfocused, already hungry. For a single, suspended second, they froze. Their heads tilted almost in unison as they caught it, the faint metallic whisper of blood leaking from the sealed bags hanging above the clearing. Their nostrils flared, lips pulled back from teeth. Then Jasper moved. The rock left his hand like a bullet and struck one of the blood bags dead center. The bag burst, causing blood to spray across bark and leaves, the scent detonating outward in a violent wave that slammed into the clearing like a physical force. Even from where I was, the metallic smell hit my nose hard, thick and cloying and impossible to ignore. The newborns snapped. Whatever thin thread of control they had vanished instantly. Snarls ripped from their throats as they surged forward, abandoning any semblance of formation. They rushed blindly toward the source, colliding with each other, clawing, shoving, screaming. The vampires moved to meet them. Carlyle and Esme struck first, blurs of motion, limbs snapping and tearing with practiced precision as they practically dismantled one of the newborns. Emmett barreled into the mass like a wrecking ball, sending newborns flying. Rosalie moved low and fast, her strikes clean and lethal, while Jasper wove through the chaos, disrupting, unbalancing, breaking their momentum, Alice covering his back in a coordinated dance. The Denalis held their ground beside them. Kate's hands flashed with deadly purpose, lightning crackling as she stunned and tore through attackers. Irina fought with sharp, efficient movements, while Carmen stayed close to Eleazar, covering his blind side as he grappled with a newborn twice his size. For a moment, it worked. The clearing exploded into motion, bodies colliding, limbs flying, the sound of snapping bones echoing off the trees. But there were too many. They kept coming. Newborns piled in from every direction, reckless and strong, throwing themselves at the Cullens and Denalis without hesitation. Even with experience on our side, the pressure began to build. I saw Carlisle forced back a step. Kate staggered as 3 newborns lunged for her at once while Irina was busy holding another 2 back. That was our cue. We hit them like a landslide. The wolves burst from the treeline in a coordinated charge, massive forms crashing into the newborns with bone-shattering force. The impact sent vampires flying, bodies torn apart mid-lunge. Leah went straight for Tanya. She slammed into the newborn attacking her partner, jaws snapping shut around its torso and ripping it clean in half. Tanya didn't even hesitate, spinning immediately to finish another, their movements falling into rhythm without a word. Sam, Jared, and Paul moved as one. A newborn lunged for Eliezer from behind, claws outstretched. They took it apart before it could touch him. Paul hit first, tackling it low. Jared grabbed an arm and tore it free, while Sam clamped down on its neck and wrenched, ripping the head clean off. I didn't slow down. I vaulted over Carlisle as a newborn leapt for him, caught it midair, and bit down hard. My jaws closed around its head, crushing and tearing until it came free. The body hit the ground separately. Another one came at me from the side. I swung a paw and sent it flying into a tree hard enough to topple it. There was no room for hesitation. No room for mercy. Just movement, instinct, and coordination. The clearing was chaos now, blood sent thick enough to make the air feel heavy. Whenever it looked like the newborns started to regain reason, another blood bag would be destroyed and they would once again enter a frenzy. Wolves and vampires moved together, covering each other's weaknesses, tearing apart anything that crossed into reach. I landed beside Leah briefly, back to back, and she glanced at me once before turning to take down another newborn with Tanya at her side. This wasn't clean or elegant, but it was working, and the vampire army that had risen from the lake was already shrinking visibly. To be continued. Thank you for watching.